Who was Plato? The man behind the mask. Plato of Athens, 428/427, 348/347 BCE, stands at a unique crossroads in Western intellectual history. He was neither the first great philosopher nor the last, yet somehow his ideas became the scaffolding upon which nearly every subsequent Western thinker built their own systems. To understand why requires us to understand not just what Plato thought, but how he thought, the revolutionary method he employed to think about thinking itself. Born into the aristocratic Athenian family during the golden age of the city-state, Plato lived through the twilight of Athenian democracy. He witnessed the chaos of the 30 tyrants, the turbulent restoration of democracy, and most crucially, the trial and execution of his beloved teacher Socrates in 399 BCE. This single event, watching a man he revered drink hemlock for daring to question conventional wisdom, became the crucible in which Plato's philosophy was forged. It converted him from a potential politician into a philosopher, and it taught him that truth-seeking was dangerous, that wisdom was rare, and that most of what people believed they knew, they didn't actually know at all. Unlike Socrates, who wrote nothing and taught through conversation in the streets, or Aristotle, who would become a systematic compiler of knowledge, Plato created something entirely new: the philosophical dialogue. Through this literary form, he could do what neither pure argument nor systematic treatise could accomplish. He could enact philosophy, dramatize the philosophical problem, and invite readers to participate in the very act of thinking. When you read Plato, you're not just reading arguments, you're witnessing human beings struggling with ideas, often failing to reach conclusions, sometimes being humbled by the complexity of what they thought they understood. This exploration is structured to mirror not just the topics Plato addressed, but the very progression of his thought, from the foundational questions about what is real, through the complex architecture of human nature and society, to the cosmic perspective that encompasses all things. Each section builds upon the previous one, creating a comprehensive picture of how Plato's ideas interconnect like the joints in a geometric proof. We'll begin with the most fundamental question: what exists? Is reality what we see around us, or is there something deeper, more true, more real beneath the surface of appearances? This question, apparently abstract and remote, actually determines everything else about how we live and what we value. From there, we'll explore Plato's famous doctrine of forms or ideas, eidos, which represents perhaps the most audacious metaphysical claim ever made: that the true reality consists of non-physical, abstract, eternal, unchanging entities that exist in a realm beyond space and time. This isn't mysticism or theology, though it sounds like it. It's a logical argument that emerges from asking seemingly simple questions. What do two just acts have in common? What makes them both just? What is just itself? Then we'll descend into the human realm, exploring Plato's tripartite soul, the idea that human psychology consists of three distinct parts: reason, spirit, and appetite, that are constantly in conflict. This psychological map, far from being mere speculation, shapes how Plato understands everything from individual flourishing to political order. We'll examine his vision of the ideal state, the republic, where philosophers rule not for personal gain, but because they understand the good and dedicate themselves to serving others. This vision has inspired utopian thinkers and terrified critics who see it as the blueprint for totalitarianism. We'll contemplate the famous allegory of the cave, perhaps the most powerful metaphor for the human condition ever created, which explains how most people live in ignorance and how the path to truth is both necessary and painful. We'll explore Plato's theory of love, eros, as a ladder ascending from physical attraction through increasingly abstract forms of beauty until it reaches contemplation of beauty itself, which is fundamentally identical with truth and the good. We'll consider his cosmology, his vision of how the universe itself was created by a divine craftsman, the demiurge, according to mathematical principles, a vision that would influence both medieval theology and modern physics. We'll examine his critique of art and poetry as dangerous imitations that distance us from truth. We'll study the Socratic method as a philosophical technique, the art of asking questions rather than providing answers. And finally, we'll explore the late dialogues where Plato himself seems to question and revise some of his earlier positions, showing us that even his greatest ideas remained subject to scrutiny and refinement. Throughout this exploration, remember this: Plato's philosophy is not a system to be memorized, but a practice to be undertaken. Each major Platonic dialogue ends inconclusively or leads to aporia, puzzlement. This is by design. Plato is trying to teach you to think, not what to think. He's trying to awaken something in you that's always been there but forgotten, just as he believed that all learning is ultimately remembrance of what the soul already knows. The roots of the problem: Heraclitus and Parmenides. To understand why Plato's philosophy matters, we must first understand the intellectual crisis he inherited. Before Plato, Greek philosophy had split into seemingly irreconcilable camps, each with a powerful argument for a radically different view of reality. On one side stood Heraclitus of Ephesus, c. 540 to 480 BCE, who taught that everything is in constant flux, that the fundamental nature of reality is change itself. "Everything flows," he famously said. "You cannot step into the same river twice, for new waters are ever flowing." For Heraclitus, permanence is an illusion. Reality is a dynamic process, a cosmic fire perpetually transforming. This view makes intuitive sense when you observe the world. Seasons change, people age, civilizations rise and fall. Even the atoms of our bodies are constantly being replaced. But Heraclitus's view creates a devastating problem. If everything is always changing, how can there be any stable knowledge? How can we even speak meaningfully about things if those things are constantly becoming something other than what they are? If a river is always different, in what sense is it the same river? The doctrine of flux seems to undermine the very possibility of truth and knowledge. Enter Parmenides of Elea, c. 515 to 445 BCE, who arrived at the opposite conclusion through rigorous logic. Parmenides argued that true reality must be eternal, unchanging, and completely unified. If something could come into being or pass away, then either something would come from nothing, which is impossible, or something would come from something else, which means it already existed. Therefore, true reality, being itself, cannot be created or destroyed. It cannot change, it cannot move. It is utterly static, uniform, and complete. This view creates an equally devastating problem. The world of sense experience shows us constant change, multiplicity, motion, and becoming. Yet Parmenides' logic seems to prove that all of this is illusory. The truth about reality is the precise opposite of what our senses tell us. This creates a chasm between appearance and reality, between the sensible world and the truly real. So the pre-Platonic Greeks faced an apparently irreconcilable dilemma. Either everything is in flux, Heraclitus, and stable knowledge is impossible, or true reality is static and unchanging, and the entire world of change we experience is illusory. How can both stability and change exist? How can reality accommodate both being and becoming? Plato's revolutionary solution, the two worlds theory. Plato's genius was to take both positions seriously rather than dismissing one as false. He asked, what if both are right? What if reality literally consists of two distinct domains? This is his fundamental insight, and it solves the problem perfectly. In the sensible world, the realm of physical objects we perceive through our senses, everything is indeed in flux. Material things are always changing, always becoming something other than what they were. This realm operates according to Heraclitus's logic. Things come into being and pass away. Nothing here is permanent. This is the realm of becoming. But there is another realm, a realm that the physical senses cannot perceive. This is the realm of being, the realm of perfect, eternal, unchanging realities that Parmenides described so accurately. In this realm, true reality resides. This is the realm of forms or ideas. This solution is so elegant because it preserves the insights of both predecessors while transcending their limitations. Heraclitus was right about the sensible world, and Parmenides was right about true reality. They were just talking about different things, and confusion between these two realms was the source of all philosophical confusion. Why this matters for human life right now? This might seem like abstract metaphysical speculation with no practical relevance. But Plato believed, and modern philosophy has increasingly vindicated him, that how you understand the nature of reality determines how you understand everything else. What you value, how you treat others, what kind of person you become, and what kind of society you build. Consider, if the only reality is the physical world, with nothing permanent or ultimate beyond it, then the ultimate logic of existence is power and consumption. Whatever lasts longest, whatever produces the most pleasure or wealth, whatever dominates other things, these become the highest goods. Under this view, justice is merely the agreement of the weak to prevent the strong from dominating them. Beauty is merely subjective preference. Virtue is merely social convention. Nothing has any ultimate meaning or worth. But if Plato is right, if there is a realm of eternal, unchanging realities, if justice itself exists, not just instances of justice, if beauty itself exists, not just beautiful things, then everything changes. Then virtue becomes something real and objective, not merely a matter of opinion. Then justice becomes an absolute standard by which we can judge human laws and institutions. Then there is something worth pursuing that transcends physical pleasure and material wealth. Then human life can have ultimate meaning. This is why Plato's metaphysics isn't distant from life, it's foundational to it. Every practical question about how to live eventually traces back to the theoretical question about what is real. Most people never articulate this connection, but it shapes their lives nonetheless. Plato forces us to make it explicit. The method: intuiting the problem through dialogue. Before we dive deeper into Plato's actual theory of forms, we should note his method. Plato doesn't simply announce his conclusions. Instead, he typically begins with a dialogue in which Socrates asks someone who claims to know something, what is courage, what is virtue, what is justice, to explain it. The dialogue partner, who often represents conventional wisdom, attempts an answer. Socrates, through careful questioning, shows that this answer leads to contradictions or is self-refuting. For instance, in the Euthyphro, Socrates asks a young priest named Euthyphro what piety is. Euthyphro confidently responds that piety is doing what the gods love. But Socrates asks, do the gods love piety because it is pious, or is it pious because the gods love it? This question, apparently simple, creates a profound dilemma. If the gods love piety because it is pious, then piety must have some nature independent of what the gods love. But if something is pious only because the gods love it, then piety seems arbitrary and dependent. This single question, carefully posed, demonstrates that Euthyphro's seemingly clear answer actually conceals deep confusion. The dialogue typically ends without reaching a final conclusion, what scholars call aporia, or puzzlement. This is crucial to understanding Plato's method. He's not primarily interested in providing answers, though he has theories about what the answers might be. He's interested in awakening readers to a sense of profound puzzlement about things they thought they understood. This puzzlement is the beginning of philosophy. It's the state of mind necessary for genuine inquiry. Many readers find this frustrating. Why doesn't Plato just tell us what he thinks? But this frustration is itself valuable. It's pulling you away from the passive consumption of ideas and toward active philosophical thinking. By refusing to spoon-feed you answers, Plato is training you to think like a philosopher. The problem of universals. What makes things what they are? The theory of forms represents Plato's central metaphysical commitment and is the foundation upon which everything else in his system rests. Yet it's also one of the most debated and difficult aspects of his philosophy, partly because Plato himself never presents it in systematic form, but rather develops it gradually through the dialogues, and partly because it seems, at first glance, almost incomprehensibly strange. The problem that generates the theory of forms is ancient and remains contemporary. What makes all instances of something, courage or beauty or justice, genuinely instances of that same thing? Imagine you encounter 10 acts that are all called courageous. One person runs into a burning building to save a child. Another stands firm against social pressure when everyone mocks them for their beliefs. A third faces down a stronger opponent who attacked them. A fourth doesn't flee when terrified. A fifth doesn't back down from their principles even when it costs them everything. These are all described as courageous, but they look radically different. The first involves physical danger, the second involves social pressure, the third involves fighting, the fourth involves overcoming fear, the fifth involves sacrifice. What do they have in common? What makes them all instances of the same virtue, courage? If you try to define courage as not being afraid, you'd immediately have a counterexample. The person facing the burning building is almost certainly afraid, yet is surely courageous. If you defined it as doing difficult things, the person struggling against social pressure might not be doing anything difficult compared to other activities, yet their struggle is genuinely courageous. No matter how you define it, exceptions and complications arise. Yet, and this is the crucial point, we immediately recognize that all these acts are examples of the same thing. We don't think we're using the word courage randomly or equivocally. We genuinely believe there's something the same about all courageous acts, something that makes them all instances of courage. This is the problem of universals. How can we explain the unity that we clearly perceive in diverse particulars? How can we explain the fact that multiple different things all seem to be examples of the same type? Plato's answer: the forms exist in a separate realm. Plato's answer is revolutionary. There exists in a realm beyond the physical world a perfect, eternal, unchanging entity, the form or idea, that is the true instantiation of that quality. All physical instances of that quality participate in or imitate the form. When we call multiple acts courageous, we're recognizing that they all participate in or imitate courage itself, the form of courage. Consider courage itself as Plato conceives it. It is not located in space or time. It cannot be perceived through the senses. It is not created or destroyed. It is absolutely perfect and complete. It is immutable, exactly the same yesterday, today, and forever. Most importantly, it is the standard by which all physical acts are measured. An act is courageous to the degree that it participates in or imitates courage itself. This might seem bizarre, but consider the logic that leads to it. Either, 1. All courageous acts are courageous by accident or convention, by mere agreement that we'll call them by that name, or 2. All courageous acts are courageous because they share some real property, something that makes them genuinely courageous. If option 1 is true, then courageous is just an arbitrary label with no real reference. But we don't believe this. We believe that calling an act courageous is a claim about how the act actually is, not just our opinion about it. We believe there's something genuinely courageous about courageous acts. So, we're committed to option 2. All courageous acts are courageous because they share some real property. But what could this shared property be? Not a physical property. Acts of courage involve different physical movements, different situations, different outcomes. The property that makes them all courageous must be something non-physical, something abstract, something that transcends their physical particularity. This abstract, universal, non-physical property that all courageous acts share is what Plato calls the form. The characteristics of the forms: perfection, eternity, immutability. Once Plato posits the existence of forms, he develops several crucial characteristics that they must possess. Perfection. The form of courage is perfectly courageous. The form of beauty is perfectly beautiful. Physical instances are always imperfect, partly courageous and partly not, partly beautiful and partly not. They always fall short. An act can be somewhat courageous or very courageous, but never perfectly courageous in the way the form itself is. Physical beauty is always mixed with ugliness. From some angles the face is beautiful, from others less so. In youth it's beautiful, but in age less so. What appears beautiful to one person appears ugly to another. The form of beauty, by contrast, is purely and perfectly beautiful to all who truly perceive it forever. Eternity. Forms do not come into being or pass away. They are not created or destroyed. Courage itself always existed and will always exist, regardless of whether any courageous act ever occurs in the physical world. By contrast, all physical things are in time. They come to be and cease to be. Physical courage appears and disappears with particular acts and persons. Immutability. Forms never change. Courage itself is exactly the same today as it was 2,400 years ago and as it will be 2,400 years hence. Physical courage, however, is constantly changing. Different manifestations, different contexts, different applications. Transcendence. Forms exist outside space and time. They're not located anywhere, not in the physical world. They're not causally efficacious. They don't cause things to happen through physical mechanisms. They're intelligible only through reason, not perceivable through the senses. Causation. Physical things are courageous because they participate or imitate the form of courage. The form is the cause of their being courageous. The form is prior to and more real than any physical instance. Unity. For each form, there is only one form. There is one form of courage, not multiple forms of courage. All courageous acts throughout all space and time are courageous because they all participate in this single, unique form. The problem of the third man, Plato's own doubts. Remarkably, Plato himself was aware of a serious logical problem with his theory. And in the dialogues Parmenides, he has Socrates face this objection directly. The problem is sometimes called the third man argument, though it applies to any form. Here's the problem. Suppose we say that all beautiful things are beautiful because they participate in the form of beauty. But now consider two beautiful things, A and B, and the form of beauty, F. What makes A and B similar? We say they're similar because they both participate in F. But what makes A and F similar? They're both beautiful. So perhaps they participate in another form, beauty too. But now what makes A and beauty too similar? Again, they're both beautiful, so they must participate in beauty 3, and we're off on an infinite regress. This is a serious problem. Plato acknowledges it in the Parmenides. The dialogue, written later in Plato's life, shows Socrates struggling to defend his theory against the logical objections raised by the elder philosopher Parmenides. Notably, Socrates does not successfully refute the objections. Instead, he essentially concedes that the theory faces serious problems, but suggests that abandoning it would lead to even worse consequences. If there are no forms, there's no stable basis for knowledge or truth at all. This is philosophically honest in a way many of Plato's critics fail to appreciate. He's not claiming to have a perfect airtight theory. He's saying, this theory has problems, but alternatives are worse. The difficulty of defending the forms is less than the difficulty of abandoning them. What are the forms? The range and hierarchy. A crucial question is, what kinds of things have forms? Clearly for Plato, abstract properties like courage, beauty, and justice have forms. But does the form doctrine extend beyond these? From the dialogues, it appears that definitely have forms: beauty, justice, courage, wisdom, temperance, piety, likeness, unlikeness, unity, plurality, sameness, difference, motion, rest. Probably have forms: colors, shapes, mathematical objects, especially numbers. Might have forms: human beings, natural kinds, horse, dog, fire, artifacts, bed, table. Do not have forms: evil, disgrace, sordidness. At least Plato argues this in one dialogue. The pattern seems to be that forms exist for properties that are eternal and universal, not for contingent or particular things. But even this distinction becomes philosophically fuzzy when you think deeply about it. Most significantly for Plato's thought, forms are arranged in a hierarchy with the form of the good at the pinnacle. This form is not just another property, but is somehow the source and explanation of all other forms. The form of the good is to the realm of forms what the sun is to the physical realm. It illuminates and sustains everything else. Indeed, Plato sometimes seems to suggest that the form of the good is even more ultimate than being itself, existing beyond being in a kind of supreme reality. Mathematical forms, the geometry of reality. One crucial aspect of Plato's forms often gets neglected, but is absolutely central to his vision. The forms are fundamentally mathematical. Numbers, geometrical shapes, and mathematical relationships exist in the realm of forms. A perfect circle exists in the realm of forms. Not as a physical object, you can't draw a perfect circle, only approximations, but as a mathematical ideal. The number 2 exists eternally in the realm of forms. The geometrical ratio that creates beauty exists in the realm of forms. This is why Plato insisted that mathematics was essential to philosophical and spiritual development. Mathematics trains the mind to think about eternal, unchanging entities that cannot be perceived through the senses, but can only be understood through reason. In doing so, mathematics prepares the mind for philosophy, for thinking about the forms themselves. This conviction that reality has a mathematical structure, that geometry and number are fundamental to understanding the universe, will echo through centuries of Western thought, from Pythagorean influence, through medieval Islamic mathematics, through the Renaissance, and directly into the mathematical physics of Newton and beyond. Particulars and forms, the relationship of participation. How exactly do physical things relate to forms? Plato uses several different metaphors, which causes interpretive difficulty, but also reveals something profound about the relationship. Sometimes he says things participate in forms. An act of courage participates in the form of courage. This suggests that the physical thing shares in or has a part of the form. Sometimes he says things imitate or image forms. A beautiful physical object is an imitation of the form of beauty. This suggests that the physical thing is a copy or reflection of the form. Sometimes he says forms are present in physical things. The form of justice is present in a just act. This suggests an almost mystical indwelling. These metaphors might seem to contradict each other, but Plato might be trying to capture something genuine about the relationship, something that no single metaphor can fully express. The relationship between a particular thing and its form is both real and strange. The physical thing is dependent on the form, it wouldn't be what it is without the form, yet the form is not physically present in it. You can't point to a physical location where beauty is present in a beautiful thing. The physical thing really does exemplify or instantiate the form, yet the form remains transcendent and separate. The architecture of reality and knowing. If the theory of forms explains what is real, the divided line, presented in Book 6 of the Republic, explains how we come to know it. This is one of Plato's most important contributions to epistemology, the theory of knowledge. The divided line is a geometrical diagram that Plato uses to organize the entire structure of reality and the corresponding levels of cognition. Imagine a vertical line divided into two unequal segments. The upper segment represents the intelligible realm, the realm of forms, accessible to reason, and the lower segment represents the sensible realm, the physical world, accessible to sensation. Each of these segments is further subdivided. The sensible realm, the lower half, is divided into images, shadows, reflections, dreams, illusions, the least real things, physical objects, the things we perceive through our senses. The intelligible realm, the upper half, is divided into mathematical objects and relationships, which are intelligible but still depend on physical objects as images. Forms themselves, intelligible and independent, the ultimate reality. Corresponding to these four levels of reality are four levels of cognition. 1. Eikasia, imagery or imagination. This is the lowest form of cognition. It corresponds to perceiving mere images and reflections. A person at this level mistakes a shadow for a real thing, a reflection in a mirror for the actual object, a dream for reality. Eikasia is not just visual, it's any mode of believing that appearance is reality. Most advertising and propaganda operates at this level, creating images designed to bypass reason and create desires and beliefs in the audience. 2. Pistis, belief or conviction. This is the level of ordinary sense perception. When you see a chair and believe that is a chair, you're operating at the level of pistis. You're perceiving physical objects and forming beliefs about them. This is a higher level than mere imagery, because physical objects are more real than mere reflections. But it's still tied to sensation and the particular. The chair you see is a particular contingent object that can be destroyed. Your belief is certain, you're sure that's a chair, but it's not knowledge in the highest sense, because its object is not eternal or fully real. 3. Dianoia, discursive reasoning or thought. This is the level of mathematical thinking. When a mathematician reasons about triangles, circles, numbers, and geometrical relationships, they're operating at the level of dianoia. Their objects are intelligible, not perceived through senses, eternal and unchanging. However, there's a crucial limitation. Mathematics still depends on assumptions and hypotheses. The mathematician assumes certain axioms and then reasons from them, but doesn't question the axioms themselves. Mathematics also still uses physical objects as images. When a mathematician draws a diagram of a triangle, they're using a physical, imperfect image to help them think about the form of triangle or geometrical relationships. So dianoia is higher than pistis, but it's limited by its dependence on hypotheses and images. 4. Noesis, intellectual intuition or understanding. This is the highest level of cognition. It's the direct intellectual apprehension of the forms themselves, culminating in the form of the good. At this level, one doesn't depend on hypotheses or assumptions. One has penetrated beyond all assumptions to the first principles themselves. One doesn't depend on physical images, one directly intuits the intelligible reality. This is the goal of philosophical development, but it's extraordinarily difficult to achieve. It requires years of training, purification of the soul, and a fundamental conversion of the entire person toward what is real rather than toward appearances. The progress from ignorance to knowledge. The divided line is not just a static map of reality and cognition. It's also a prescription for spiritual and intellectual development. The human being begins, typically, at the level of akasia, trapped in images, mistakes, and illusions. The philosophical life is a gradual ascent toward noesis. This ascent is not automatic or natural. Most people never make it. They live their entire lives at the level of pistis, perhaps occasionally touching dianoia in certain domains like mathematics or craftsmanship. They never question their assumptions about what is real or valuable. They never push through the veil of appearances to the intelligible realm. But those who commit to philosophy can gradually ascend. First, they learn to distinguish between the image and the reality, between what things appear to be and what they actually are. This is often painful because many of our cherished beliefs are revealed as illusions. The political order you thought was just might be revealed as unjust. The person you thought was wise might be revealed as foolish. The pleasure you thought would make you happy might lead to suffering. Next, they learn to think mathematically, to recognize that certain truths are universal, eternal, and knowable through reason independent of particular sensory experience. This training teaches the mind that reason has access to reality beyond what sensation reveals. Finally, if they persist and purify their souls, they might begin to intuit the forms directly, and ultimately grasp the form of the good itself, the source and explanation of all reality. And knowledge. The form of the good, the sun of the intelligible realm. The form of the good is the crown of Plato's philosophy, and it's also the most mysterious and difficult to understand. Plato speaks of it through analogy rather than direct description. Just as the sun in the physical realm illuminates physical objects and makes them visible to the eye, so the form of the good in the intelligible realm illuminates the forms and makes them intelligible to the mind. Just as the sun is the source of heat, light, and life in the physical world, So the form of the good is the source of reality, intelligibility, and being in the intelligible realm. Remarkably, Plato suggests that the form of the good is even beyond being itself. It has a kind of supreme reality that transcends being. When you directly apprehend the form of the good, you understand not just that things exist, but why they exist, what they're for, and how they fit into a meaningful cosmic order. The form of the good is not merely an intellectual principle, it's also fundamentally ethical. To know the good is to love it, to orient your entire life around it, to become unified with it. This is why philosophy is not just intellectual inquiry for Plato, but spiritual transformation. It's not enough to understand that justice is good. You must become just. It's not enough to understand that courage is good. You must become courageous. This is a radical vision because it suggests that truth is not merely something you know, but something you become. The philosopher is not someone who accumulates true beliefs, but someone who undergoes a fundamental transformation of character through contact with reality itself. Limitations and paradoxes. The divided line is a profound instrument for understanding Plato's epistemology, but it's not without tensions and paradoxes. One issue is the relationship between dianoia and gnosis. Plato suggests that mathematics still depends on hypotheses and images, while philosophy directly intuits the forms. But this seems too sharp a distinction. Don't mathematicians also directly understand certain truths? Don't philosophers still use some form of reasoning that resembles dianoia? The exact relationship between these two levels remains somewhat unclear. Another issue is the status of the intelligible objects that are not forms. What about mathematical objects? If a mathematical triangle is less real than the form of triangle, in what sense do mathematical truths apply to physical triangles? If we learn mathematical truths and then apply them to the physical world, doesn't this suggest that dianoia actually does give us knowledge of reality? Furthermore, how can the form of the good be beyond being? If it's not being, what is it? Plato acknowledges the strangeness of this claim, but insists that reason requires it. It seems that even for Plato, the ultimate principle of reality transcends complete conceptual comprehension. At the highest reaches of philosophy, we encounter mystery. Despite these tensions, the divided line remains a powerful framework for understanding the epistemological journey Plato envisions. It explains why education is so important, it's the journey up the line, why most people are trapped in error, they're stuck at the lower levels, and why philosophy is difficult and transformative. It requires ascending the entire line. The question of justice. What is it really? The Republic, Plato's most famous work, begins with a deceptively simple question: what is justice? But by the time we're deep into the dialogue, we realize that justice is not simply a moral quality or a legal concept. For Plato, justice is the fundamental principle of order, in the soul, in the state, and potentially in the cosmos itself. The dialogue opens with Socrates encountering several companions who offer various definitions of justice. Cephalus suggests that justice is telling the truth and repaying what you owe. But Socrates easily shows this is inadequate. If you borrow a weapon from someone who later goes insane and asks for it back, giving the weapon back would be harmful, not just. So justice isn't simply repaying debts. Polemarchus suggests that justice is helping friends and harming enemies. But again, Socrates shows this fails. The just person wouldn't harm anyone, since harming someone makes them worse, which is unjust. So justice can't be about harming enemies. Then Thrasymachus, a sophist, offers a more provocative answer. Justice is the interest of the stronger. Laws and ideas about justice are merely tools created by the powerful to maintain their power over the weak. Justice is fundamentally about power, not about any objective moral order. It's better to commit injustice, if you can get away with it, than to suffer it, because the unjust life of a successful tyrant is better than the just life of an oppressed person. This is a formidable objection. For much of the dialogue, Socrates works to respond to Thrasymachus by proposing a radical idea. Justice is not a quality external to human beings, a law we're forced to follow, a constraint on our desires, but rather a quality internal to the soul, a harmony, a right ordering of the parts of the soul. The tripartite soul: reason, spirit, and appetite. To understand justice in the soul, Plato first analyzes the structure of the human soul. He argues that the soul consists of three distinct parts, each with its own desires, its own logic, and its own proper function. 1. Reason, logos. This is the highest part of the soul. It loves truth and wisdom. It alone can perceive the forms and understand the good. Reason is capable of governing the whole soul and directing it toward what is genuinely good rather than merely apparent good. In a well-ordered soul, reason rules, not through force, but through wisdom and understanding. The person with a strong rational faculty can see through illusions, resist manipulation, and orient themselves toward reality rather than appearance. 2. Spirit, thymos. This is the intermediate part. Sometimes translated as courage or will, spirit is the seat of emotion, passion, honor, and determination. Spirit is capable of supporting reason, feeling anger at injustice, feeling courage in the face of danger, feeling shame at doing wrong, or supporting appetite, using physical courage to pursue physical desires. Spirit is drawn to honor, reputation, and recognition. A person with well-developed spirit is courageous, spirited, honorable, willing to fight for what they believe is right. 3. Appetite, epithemia. This is the lowest part. It includes physical desires, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, the desire for wealth and possessions. Appetite is not evil in itself. We need to eat, drink, and reproduce, but it is characterized by a kind of insatiability. Appetite always wants more. If left to govern itself, appetite will grow without limit, creating a chaotic, dissatisfied soul. A person ruled by appetite is enslaved to their desires, constantly pursuing what seems pleasant in the moment. These three parts are not arbitrary divisions, but seem to reflect genuine features of human psychology. Have you not experienced internal conflict? You want to go to the gym, reason says it's good for you, but your appetite wants to sleep in. Your spirit might intervene, motivating you through honor. I'm a person who keeps my commitments. Or it might side with appetite. I deserve a break. The three parts genuinely seem to exist in tension, each pulling in different directions. The three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Justice in the soul, harmony and right order. Now Plato can define justice. Justice in the soul is the proper ordering and harmony of these three parts. Justice occurs when each part of the soul performs its proper function and each part is in its proper place in the hierarchy. Specifically, reason should rule, governing the whole soul through wisdom and understanding. Spirit should support reason, maintaining courage and honor, and helping to subdue appetite. Appetite should obey, accepting the governance of reason and spirit, satisfied with what is necessary for life. When this hierarchy is intact, the soul is healthy, unified, and at peace. The person is just. They don't commit injustice not because they fear punishment, external constraint, but because they have no desire to. Injustice creates internal disorder. It causes the parts of the soul to revolt against each other, to war against themselves. Conversely, injustice is a kind of soul sickness. When appetite rules, the person is enslaved to pleasure, or when spirit rules without guidance from reason, the person is tyrannical, driven by honor and competition without wisdom, the soul is in chaos. The parts are at war with each other. This internal disorder is the real punishment of injustice, worse than any external punishment. This is why Socrates can argue that it's better to suffer injustice than to commit it. The person who commits injustice has a disordered, diseased soul. The person who suffers injustice but remains just has a healthy soul. And the soul is infinitely more valuable than the body or external possessions. A person with a healthy soul is truly happy, eudaimon, flourishing, even if they're poor or suffering externally. A person with a diseased soul is truly miserable, even if they're rich and powerful externally. This is Socrates' answer to Thrasymachus. The unjust person is not truly successful or happy. They might have power and pleasure, but they lack the internal harmony that constitutes true flourishing. The just person, even if they suffer externally, has achieved true success, the only success that matters, the harmony and health of their own soul. The perfect state, an expression of the perfect soul. But Plato doesn't stop with the individual soul. He argues that justice in the state is simply an enlargement of justice in the individual. A just state has the same structure as a just soul. The ideal state consists of three classes, each performing its proper function. 1. The rulers, philosopher kings. These are the people with strong rational faculties who have studied mathematics and philosophy and have glimpsed the form of the good. They alone have the wisdom to govern justly because they understand the good of the whole state and are not driven by personal ambition. They rule not because they desire power, but because they recognize it as their duty. They would prefer to contemplate the forms, but they descend back into the cave of politics to serve others. 2. The auxiliaries, warriors. These are spirited people with courage and honor. They enforce the laws determined by the rulers. They protect the state from external enemies. They support the authority of reason. They're selected and trained from birth, educated in physical fitness and music, which develops harmony of the soul. They live communally with shared possessions to prevent them from pursuing private wealth and power. 3. The producers, craftspeople, farmers, merchants. These are people focused on appetite and material production. They provide the material goods the state needs: food, clothing, shelter, tools. They're the largest class. They pursue their own interests within limits set by the rulers and defended by the auxiliaries. They engage in commerce, accumulate property, and generally pursue the satisfaction of appetite within appropriate bounds. Justice in the state, like justice in the soul, is harmony. Each class performing its proper function, each subordinate to the authority above it. The radical proposals: communism, the guardians, and eugenics. To ensure that the rulers and auxiliaries genuinely serve the common good rather than pursuing private interests, Plato proposes radical measures that have disturbed readers ever since. Communism for the guardians. The rulers and auxiliaries should have no private property. Their possessions should be held in common. They should live simply, almost ascetically, so that they're not tempted by wealth. They should have no private families. Instead, children should be raised communally so that all guardians regard all children as their own, eliminating private family loyalties that might conflict with loyalty to the state. Selective breeding. The rulers should arrange marriages to produce the best offspring. Plato essentially proposes eugenics, the deliberate selection of superior genetic material. The best women should breed with the best men. Children of inferior quality should not be allowed to survive. The goal is to produce a guardian class with the highest possible intelligence and virtue. The equality of women. Remarkably, Plato argues that women should be trained and selected for rulership just as men are. If a woman has the rational faculty and wisdom, she should be a ruler. Gender is irrelevant to fitness for governance. This was an extraordinarily radical proposal in Plato's time and remains controversial today in some places. Censorship of art and poetry. Plato argues that the poets and artists should be censored. Only art that educates the soul toward virtue should be permitted. Art that appeals to appetite or creates false images should be banned. This disturbs modern readers, but Plato's concern is real. If reason should rule in the soul, then whatever misleads reason or strengthens appetite should be limited. These proposals reveal something important about Plato's thought. He's willing to follow logic to surprising conclusions, even if those conclusions contradict conventional morality. He's not trying to win favor or comfort his readers. He's pursuing truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Criticisms and tensions. Even within the Republic, some characters question these proposals. And later Platonic dialogues, especially the Laws, suggest that Plato himself recognized difficulties with the strict version of the ideal state. The problem of knowledge. How do the rulers know what is good for the state? Even if they've studied philosophy, do they really have certain knowledge? What if their judgment is wrong? This is a profound question. Even a rationally ordered state requires wise rule, and wisdom might be rarer and more difficult to achieve than Plato suggests. The problem of power. If the rulers have absolute authority, what prevents them from becoming tyrants? Plato's answer is that they've been educated and trained to seek the good of the state. But isn't this optimistic? Can education guarantee virtue? The problem of human nature. Are people really as malleable as Plato suggests? Can communism work if people naturally desire family and private property? Can people be educated from birth to serve the state without developing resentment or rebellion? The problem of motivation. Why would the philosophers want to rule? Why would they leave philosophical contemplation to engage in politics? Plato's answer, duty and the education instilled in them, might not be psychologically realistic. These tensions don't refute Plato's vision, but they show that even the most careful logical thinking about justice must grapple with the complexity of human nature and the limits of political power. The decline of regimes, a philosophy of history. Later in the Republic, Plato sketches a philosophy of history. Just as individual souls decline from justice to various forms of disorder, so states decline from the perfect oligarchy, rule by the wise, through progressively worse forms of government. The perfect state declines into timocracy, rule by the spirited, honor seekers. The timocratic state values reputation and honor more than wisdom. It's more warlike, more focused on victory and domination. Timocracy declines into oligarchy, rule by the wealthy. In oligarchy, the pursuit of wealth replaces the pursuit of honor. The wealthy rule and accumulate more wealth. The state becomes divided into rich and poor, and the poor increasingly resent the rule of the rich. Oligarchy declines into democracy, rule by the many. In democracy, the poor get their voice and power. But Plato sees democracy as chaotic and unstable. There are no fixed rules, no clear hierarchy. Everyone thinks they should have a say in everything. Liberty becomes license. There's no discipline, no order. Finally, democracy declines into tyranny. The chaos of democracy becomes intolerable. The people, desperate for order, turn to a strong man who promises to restore it. This strong man becomes a tyrant, a ruler focused entirely on his own power and pleasure, using the state as a tool for personal gratification. This cycle, wisdom to honor to wealth to democracy to tyranny, is not inevitable, but it's a tendency inherent in human nature. Only by maintaining the educations and structures that keep reason in power can the decline be prevented. Why would the wise want to rule? One of the deepest tensions in Plato's political theory emerges from a seemingly simple question. If the philosophers are the only ones fit to rule, and if philosophers are people who have escaped the cave and glimpsed the form of the good, why would they ever agree to leave the contemplation of eternal truths to engage in the messy, difficult, often frustrating business of politics? In fact, the more advanced a philosopher becomes, the less interested they seem to be in ruling. A person who has achieved gnosis, direct intellectual intuition of the forms, has experienced something transcendent. They've seen reality itself. Compared to this, political power is a distraction, a degradation. It's like asking someone who has escaped a prison and reached the sunlit world to go back into the darkness. Plato's answer: justice and obligation. Plato's answer reveals something profound about his ethics. He argues that the philosopher has a duty to rule. This duty arises from two sources. First, from justice itself. If the city has invested in your education, supported your ascent to wisdom, created the conditions for you to perceive the good, then you have an obligation to repay this debt. You cannot accept the benefits of a just society and then refuse to contribute to its justice. To do so would be parasitical. Second, from the nature of the good itself. The form of the good is not just truth, but also goodness. To truly know the good is to love it and to want to promote it. If you genuinely understand what's good for the state, you cannot be indifferent to whether the state achieves this good. Philosophical knowledge is not neutral contemplation, but involves a kind of spiritual transformation that includes compassion and a desire to help others. So, the philosopher king rules not because they want power, they don't, but because they recognize an ethical obligation. They're like a doctor forced to practice medicine, or a captain forced to navigate a ship during a storm. They do it because it's necessary, because others depend on them, because their knowledge obligates them. The reluctant ruler, a political psychology. This vision of the reluctant ruler is psychologically and politically sophisticated in ways often overlooked. Plato understands that the person who seeks power is usually unfit to wield it. The ambitious person, the glory seeker, the person who craves the minion is driven by spirit and appetite, not reason. Such a person will inevitably use power for personal gain, creating injustice. The only safe ruler is one who doesn't want power and would prefer to be doing something else. Such a person won't be tempted to abuse power for personal enrichment or glory because they're indifferent to wealth and reputation. Their only motive is to serve the common good, and that's precisely what justice requires. This is why Plato insists that the rulers should have no private property and no private families. These deprivations ensure that they have no personal interests to promote through their position. They literally cannot gain wealth or power private advantage through ruling. Their only possible motive is the good of the state. The education of the rulers, 30 years to wisdom. What kind of training produces a philosopher king? Plato sketches an extraordinary educational program that takes 30 years. Ages 3 to 20, physical education and music. During childhood and adolescence, future rulers undergo rigorous physical training to develop courage and health, combined with music and mathematics to harmonize the soul. Music includes what we'd call the arts and humanities, poetry, drama, philosophy, designed to refine the emotional and aesthetic sensibilities. The goal is to develop a harmonious soul, balanced between physical development and intellectual refinement. Ages 20 to 30, mathematics. The most intensive phase. Potential rulers study geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and harmonics, the mathematical sciences. This is not to make them engineers or astronomers, but to train the mind to think about eternal, unchanging truths accessible only through reason, independent of sensory experience. Mathematics disciplines the mind, teaching it to follow rigorous logical reasoning and to distinguish between opinion and knowledge. Ages 30 to 35, dialectic, the culmination of education. The most promising students proceed to dialectic, Socratic questioning designed to lead the soul beyond hypotheses to first principles, ultimately to the form of the good. Dialectic is not a subject to be learned, but a practice to be undergone. It requires a guide, a master dialectician who uses carefully crafted questions to lead the student to see the contradictions in their thinking and to ascend to higher understanding. Only a few can succeed at this level. Many will fail and drop out to pursue other roles in the state. Ages 35 to 50, practical rule and military service. Those who have succeeded in dialectic don't immediately rule. Instead, they spend 15 years in practical military and administrative roles, testing their wisdom in real conditions. This proves that their wisdom isn't merely theoretical, but can be applied to actual problems. It also keeps them connected to the real world and the needs of ordinary people. Ages 50 plus, ruling and philosophical study. Finally, at age 50, those who have survived this entire process are ready to rule. But even then, they continue their philosophical studies. They rule for the good of the state, but they're not confined to rule. They have time for philosophical contemplation as well. And eventually, around age 50 or so, those who have ruled step aside to let younger philosophers rule, returning full-time to philosophy. This educational system is extraordinary, but it reveals Plato's conviction that wisdom is rare, that it requires long training, and that it's worth the investment to achieve true justice. The myth of the metals, justifying hierarchy. How can the state convince people to accept this hierarchy? How can it justify why some rule while others obey? Plato recognizes this is a practical problem. He proposes, and his tone here is ironic but instructive, telling a myth. The myth of the metals says that different humans are made of different metals mixed in their souls. Rulers have gold in their souls. They love wisdom and the good. Auxiliaries have silver in their souls. They love honor and courage. Producers have bronze or iron in their souls. They love the material and practical. The state should teach this myth to justify the social hierarchy. Those with gold should rule, those with silver should protect, those with bronze should produce. Each should accept their role as natural to their nature. Plato is somewhat coy about this myth. He calls it a noble lie. He recognizes that it's not literally true. People of different metals aren't actually born with different metals in their souls. But he argues that it's a useful fiction, a story that helps maintain social order, because people are more likely to accept hierarchy if they believe it's justified by nature. Some readers interpret Plato as endorsing this myth straightforwardly. Others see his irony and suggest that noble lies are sometimes necessary for social stability. Either way, the myth reveals Plato's understanding that political order requires more than rational argument. It requires stories, myths, and symbols that move the soul and create loyalty to the state. Criticisms: the totalitarian potential. Plato's vision of the philosopher king has been both inspiring and troubling throughout history. In the 20th century, Karl Popper argued that Plato's Republic is essentially a blueprint for totalitarianism. The total control over education, the elimination of private property, the censorship of art, the arrangement of marriages, the community of children, these look disturbingly like the authoritarian states that ravaged the century. Even if we grant that Plato's intentions were benevolent, he genuinely wanted justice, his system concentrates enormous power in the hands of rulers. What prevents those rulers from becoming corrupt? What if they misuse their power? Plato's answer, that they're educated and trained to seek the good, might be insufficient protection. However, a more charitable reading notes that Plato intended his system to prevent corruption precisely through the structure of the system itself. By removing private property and family, by requiring long training and testing, by maintaining philosophical study and dialogue among the rulers, by limiting power, rulers eventually step aside, Plato was trying to create institutions that would constrain power and keep it directed towards justice. The question, which remains open, is whether such institutional constraints are enough. Can any system prevent the corruption of power? Or is power corruption inherent to concentrated power? This remains one of the central questions of political philosophy. Beyond reason alone, the complexity of motivation. In contemporary philosophy and psychology, there's often an assumption that reason is or should be the governing principle of human behavior. We celebrate rationality and disdain emotion. But Plato understood something crucial that we often forget. Human beings are not purely rational. We are creatures of multiple drives, multiple motivations, multiple desires that don't neatly reduce to reason. The doctrine of the tripartite soul, which we introduced earlier, is not just a descriptive model of how the soul is organized. It's also a profound analysis of how human motivation works and why people behave as they do. Understanding this is crucial for understanding ethics, psychology, education, and politics. Reason, the principle of order. Reason, logos, in Plato's psychology is not merely intellectual calculation. It's a principle of order, harmony, and reality connection. When reason governs, the soul is oriented toward truth, toward what actually is rather than toward appearance. Reason asks, what is truly good? What is genuinely real? What should I do to achieve eudaimonia, true flourishing? A person governed by reason is fundamentally oriented toward understanding reality as it truly is. They're willing to have their illusions shattered. They're willing to follow an argument wherever it leads, even if it contradicts their previously held beliefs. They're humble before reality, willing to be corrected. Reason alone is not passionate or emotional. It doesn't motivate through fear, ambition, or desire for pleasure. It motivates through understanding, through the recognition that this is how things truly are, and this is what genuine flourishing requires. To a person of strong reason, the arguments are sufficient. Once you truly understand that injustice disorders the soul and justice orders it, you'll want to be just, not for fear of punishment, but for love of your own psychological health. Spirit, the seat of passion and honor. If reason were the only part of the soul, human beings would be like calculating machines, efficient but cold. But we're not like that. We feel, we have passions, we care about honor and reputation. This is the work of spirit. Spirit, thymos, is the seat of emotions, anger, courage, shame, honor-seeking, competitive drive. Unlike appetite, which is focused on bodily pleasure and material advantage, spirit is focused on non-material goods, honor, reputation, recognition, the respect of others. Spirit is crucial to virtue precisely because virtue often requires us to do what reason tells us is right, even when appetite desperately doesn't want to. Courage requires facing fear and danger. Temperance requires restraining physical desire. Justice requires sacrificing personal advantage. Reason can understand that these are necessary, but it might not have the motivational force to overcome powerful desires. This is where spirit comes in. A spirited person feels shame at doing wrong. They feel anger when justice is violated. They feel the drive to fight for what's right, to defend the weak, to maintain honor. These emotional responses, far from being impediments to virtue, are essential to virtue. Consider a soldier in battle. Reason might tell them that standing firm against the enemy is necessary for the good of the group. But at a purely rational level, self-preservation might suggest fleeing. What enables the soldier to act courageously despite fear? Spirit, the emotional drive for honor, the shame of fleeing, the pride of standing with comrades, the sense of duty to something larger than themselves. Or consider a person tempted to commit an injustice that would benefit them materially. Reason can argue that the disordered soul caused by injustice is worse than material loss. But this reasoning might not be emotionally persuasive. What prevents the person from succumbing? Spirit, the sense of shame, the honor of being a just person, the inner sense that this would be wrong. Appetite, the seat of desire and pleasure. Appetite, epithemia, is the seat of bodily desires, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, the desire for wealth and physical comfort. Like reason and spirit, appetite is not evil per se. We need to eat, drink, and reproduce. Some appetitive desires are necessary for survival. The problem arises when appetite dominates, when it's not subject to the governance of reason and spirit. An important feature of appetite in Plato's analysis is its insatiability. Unlike the spirited part, which is focused on honor, which is limited, you can only be so honored, or reason, which is satisfied when it understands truth, appetite never feels satisfied. Give appetite what it wants, and it immediately wants more. A person enslaved to appetite is engaged in an endless, exhausting cycle of desire and temporary satisfaction followed by renewed desire. This creates a kind of practical problem. How much money is enough? Appetite says more. How much sexual pleasure is enough? Appetite says more. How much food is enough? Appetite says more. If appetite rules the soul, the person is trapped on a hedonic treadmill, always pursuing the next satisfaction, never content, never at peace. In Plato's view, the person ruled by appetite is essentially enslaved to their own desires. They're not free in any meaningful sense because their actions are determined by compulsive desire. This is why Plato associates appetite rule with slavery and reason rule with freedom. The hierarchy and harmony. The health and virtue of the soul consists in proper hierarchy and harmony. Reason rules, spirit supports reason, and appetite obeys. This is not a repression or denial of appetite and spirit. Both have legitimate roles, but a proper ordering where each part serves its function within a unified whole. When this hierarchy is maintained, appetite is satisfied appropriately. The person eats when hungry, drinks when thirsty, but doesn't indulge in excess. They pursue wealth as a means to security and comfort, but not as an end in itself. They experience sexual pleasure within appropriate contexts. Unlike the glutton or the hedonist, they're not enslaved to desire, but in control of it. Spirit works in service of reason. The person is courageous, maintaining honor and integrity, but their courage is guided by wisdom. They don't fight foolish battles or pursue pointless competitions. Their competitive energy is directed toward genuine goods. Their sense of shame keeps them from injustice. Their pride is connected to genuine virtue, not mere status. Reason governs the whole, understanding what is genuinely good and directing the entire person toward it. Reason ensures that immediate desires don't override long-term flourishing. Reason insists on truth even when comforting illusions are available. The result is a soul that is unified, at peace with itself, and genuinely free. The person is not buffeted about by competing desires, but has a coherent sense of direction. They know what they're living for and why. The disharmony of vice, a soul at war. Conversely, when the harmony is broken, various vices result. When appetite rules, the person is enslaved to physical desire. They pursue wealth beyond what's reasonable, sexual pleasure without discrimination, food and drink to the point of illness. They're chronically unsatisfied, anxious about whether they'll have enough, desperate for more. They're at the mercy of their desires. When spirit rules without reason, the person becomes tyrannical and domineering. They seek power, prestige, and dominion over others. They're obsessed with honor and reputation. They're competitive and aggressive. Unlike the appetite-ruled person, they're not enslaved to bodily desire, but they are enslaved to the desire for recognition and power. And since such desires are often thwarted, you can't always win, people often don't give you the recognition you crave, the spirited but unreasoning person is often angry, resentful, and frustrated. When reason is weak, the person is confused about what's truly good. They might know intellectually that the just life is better than the unjust life, but they don't feel it. They're susceptible to sophistry and rhetoric, persuasive arguments that seem to justify their desires. They're unstable, changing their minds based on whoever last spoke to them. In each case, the soul lacks unity. The parts are fighting each other. One part wants security, another wants honor, another wants pleasure. The person is pulled in different directions, inconsistent, at war with themselves. This internal conflict is the real punishment of vice, worse than any external punishment. Education and the development of the soul. Given this model of the soul, education takes on enormous importance. Education isn't primarily about acquiring information. It's about forming the soul, training each part to function properly, and creating harmony among the parts. Physical education, gymnastics, trains the body and develops spirit, courage, endurance, determination. It teaches the body to obey reason rather than pursue immediate comfort. Music and the arts train emotion and refine sensibility. They develop aesthetic sensitivity and prepare the soul to perceive beauty and harmony. They also train spirit, teaching it what is honorable and shameful through stories and examples. Mathematics trains reason, teaching it to think about eternal, unchanging truths and to follow rigorous logical reasoning. Dialectic develops reason further, leading it beyond assumptions and hypotheses to first principles and the form of the good. Throughout this education, the goal is to create a unified soul where reason is strong and clear, spirit is noble and honor-loving, and appetite is satisfied within appropriate limits. A person with such a soul is truly free, truly happy, truly virtuous. The soul and society, macrocosm and microcosm. This tripartite psychology isn't just individual, it has a social and cosmic dimension. Plato sees the ideal state as an enlarged version of the ideal soul. Just as the individual soul has 3 parts, the ideal state has 3 classes. Just as the individual soul achieves justice through hierarchy and harmony, the state achieves justice through each class performing its proper function. Just as the individual soul is dominated by either reason, spirit, or appetite, so the state can be dominated by wisdom, aristocracy, honor, wealth, oligarchy. This parallel between individual psychology and social order is one of Plato's most profound insights. It suggests that political problems are fundamentally reflections of psychological problems. You cannot have a just state composed of unjust souls. You cannot have wise rule without wise rulers. You cannot have a well-ordered society composed of disordered individuals. Conversely, the individual soul develops properly only within a just society that provides the right education and the right structure. The individual and society are not independent, they form an interconnected whole. Personal virtue and social justice are inseparable. Most people are asleep. For Plato, most people live in a state of spiritual and intellectual sleep. They take the apparent for the real, opinion for knowledge, pleasant illusions for truth. They're not necessarily stupid. In fact, some very clever people are completely asleep, capable of sophisticated reasoning in service of false assumptions. What they lack is awakening. Education, in Plato's vision, is not primarily the transfer of information from a knowledgeable teacher to an ignorant student. It's not the filling of empty vessels. It's an awakening, a turning of the entire soul toward reality. It's a conversion experience. The Greek word metanoia, often translated as repentance in religious contexts, literally means a turning around, a fundamental reorientation. This is what Platonic education is, metanoia, a complete turning around of the person. The stages of education. Plato describes education as a long process with distinct stages, each building on the previous. Stage 1. Physical and artistic education, ages 3 to 20. The first 20 years of education focus on the body and emotions. Physical training through gymnastics develops courage, health, and discipline. It teaches the body to obey the mind rather than pursue immediate comfort. Music and poetry, broadly understood as the arts and humanities, refine the emotional sensibilities. Through stories, songs, and artistic experience, young people learn what is beautiful and ugly, noble and base, honorable and shameful. This is not training through abstract rules, but through emotional resonance. When you hear a heroic story, you feel admiration. When you witness injustice, you feel anger. These emotional responses, properly trained, dispose you toward virtue. Plato is insistent that the content of artistic education matters enormously. If young people are exposed to stories that glorify injustice, that depict vice as attractive, that encourage them to pursue appetite without restraint, then their emotional dispositions will be shaped toward vice. If they're exposed to noble stories, beautiful art, and inspiring examples, their emotions will be shaped toward virtue. This is why Plato proposes censoring art that corrupts the young. This will disturb modern readers. We value artistic freedom, but Plato's concern is real. Art shapes emotion, emotion shapes behavior, and early emotional training is foundational to the entire person. Stage 2. Mathematics, ages 20 to 30. During the third decade of life, the most promising young people are selected for intensive mathematical training. They study geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, understood mathematically, and harmonics, the mathematics of musical ratios. Why mathematics? Not to train engineers or astronomers, though mathematics has practical applications. The purpose is to train the mind to think about eternal, unchanging entities that cannot be perceived through the senses, but only understood through reason. Mathematics is a bridge between the sensible world and the intelligible world. It trains the mind in abstract reasoning, rigorous proof, and the pursuit of truth independent of opinion and emotion. It trains patience and precision. It shows the mind that certain truths are universal and eternal. Moreover, mathematics trains the soul toward the good. The beauty of a mathematical proof, the harmony of geometric relationships, the elegant simplicity underlying apparent complexity, these experiences move the soul toward a love of beauty and truth. A person who has deeply studied mathematics understands something about the eternal, unchanging nature of reality. Stage 3. Dialectic, ages 30 to 35. Those who have excellent in mathematics proceed to dialectic, Socratic dialogue aimed at achieving wisdom. This is the most difficult stage, and most people don't make it. It requires a master, a philosopher skilled in dialectic, who can guide the student. Dialectic is distinct from mathematics in that it doesn't assume fixed axioms or hypotheses. Instead, it questions all assumptions, including the very assumptions of mathematics. The master dialectician leads the student to question everything they think they know. Through careful questioning, the student recognizes contradictions in their thinking. They're confused, puzzled, uncertain. This state of aporia, bewilderment, is crucial. It breaks the student's confidence in conventional knowledge. It opens them to genuine inquiry. As the dialogue proceeds, the student gradually ascends. They move beyond particular instances and examples to universal principles. They move beyond dependent hypotheses to first principles. They eventually glimpse the form of the good itself, the source and explanation of all reality. This experience is transformative. Once you've glimpsed the form of the good, you cannot go back to taking appearances as reality. You've seen reality itself. Everything else appears as shadow by comparison. Stage 4. Practical experience, ages 35 to 50. Rather than immediately ruling after achieving philosophical wisdom, potential leaders spend 15 years in military and administrative roles. This grounds their wisdom in practical reality. It tests whether their philosophy actually works in real situations. It also keeps them connected to ordinary people and their needs. A philosopher who has never worked, who has never faced difficult practical decisions, whose wisdom has never been tested in real conditions, is not ready to rule. Stage 5. Rule and continued study, age 50. Finally, around age 50, those who have survived the entire process are qualified to rule. But even then, their rule is limited. They rule for fixed periods, then step aside to let younger philosophers rule. They continue their philosophical studies. They return to the forms, to contemplation, to the pursuit of wisdom. Their ruling is not a career, but a duty, and it's balanced with continued philosophical inquiry. This 5-stage educational system is extraordinary precisely because it recognizes that wisdom is rare and that it requires long, difficult development. It's not something that can be achieved quickly or without radical personal transformation. It requires 30 years of concentrated effort to prepare someone to rule. This reflects Plato's conviction that wisdom is the highest achievement, worth any investment of time and effort. The nature of learning, recollection, not acquisition. A crucial feature of Platonic education is that learning is not acquiring something new from the outside. Instead, it's recollection, anamnesis, remembering what the soul already knows. This seems strange. If you already know something, why is education necessary? But Plato's view is subtle. He's not suggesting that you consciously remember knowledge. Rather, the soul, having existed before birth and having contemplated the forms directly, carries this knowledge within it. But in being born into a body and immersed in the sensible world, the soul becomes forgetful. Education is the process of reminding the soul, awakening it to knowledge it already possesses but has forgotten. Evidence for this doctrine comes from an unusual source, Plato's dialogue Meno. In this dialogue, Socrates interrogates an uneducated slave boy, asking him questions about geometry. The boy has never been taught geometry. Yet through Socratic questioning alone, without instruction or information being given, the boy comes to understand geometric truths. How is this possible if geometry wasn't taught to him? Plato's explanation? The boy already knew it in his soul. Socratic questioning simply reminded him, awakened his recollection. This theory of recollection has profound implications. It suggests that everyone has access to truth within themselves. You don't depend on external authorities telling you what is true. Through proper questioning and reflection, you can access the truth that's within you. This is deeply democratic. It suggests that wisdom is available to anyone willing to undergo the process of recollection. It's also profoundly non-empiricist. It denies that knowledge comes from sensory experience. All genuine knowledge is recollection of the forms. Sensory experience can trigger recollection. You see beautiful things, and this reminds you of beauty itself, but the knowledge itself is not derived from experience. The teacher's role, midwife, not filler. Socrates describes himself as a midwife of ideas. Just as a midwife doesn't create the baby, but assists in bringing it forth, the Socratic teacher doesn't impart knowledge, but assists the student in giving birth to knowledge that lies within them. This means the teacher's role is not to lecture or to provide information. It's to ask questions, to create confusion, to push the student to think for themselves. It's to point out contradictions, to demand clarity, to refuse easy answers. It's an active, engaged practice of dialogue. This has profound implications for education. It means that genuine learning cannot be passive. You cannot learn by sitting back and absorbing information. You must think, struggle, question, be confused, work your way to understanding. The process is difficult, often frustrating, but it's also transformative. When you achieve understanding through this process, it's not merely intellectual, it's existential. The understanding becomes part of who you are. It also means that education cannot be standardized or mass-produced. Each student is unique, each requires a different approach. The teacher must know each student, understand their particular confusions and prejudices, ask the questions that will push them forward. This is why Plato's vision of education requires small groups and close personal relationships between teacher and student. The community of inquiry. Platonic education is not a solitary process, it's fundamentally communal. It happens in dialogue, in conversation between teacher and students, among students with each other. The dialectical method is inherently social. This creates a community of inquiry, people united in the pursuit of truth. In this community, hierarchy is not based on power or wealth, but on wisdom and progress in philosophy. The person who has gone further in understanding the forms has authority not through force, but through the recognition that they've attained what all are seeking. Within this community, the pursuit of truth is more important than the ego of any individual. If your argument is refuted, that's good. You've been corrected, brought closer to truth. If someone else's argument is stronger, that's good. Truth has been advanced. Disagreement is not conflict, but an instrument for reaching truth. This stands in stark contrast to sophistic education, which Plato vigorously critiques. Sophists, in Plato's view, are teachers who claim to teach virtue and wisdom, but actually teach rhetoric, the art of persuasion. They teach how to win arguments, not how to find truth. They're motivated by money, not by love of wisdom. They create competition among students rather than community. They're willing to argue for any position if it's profitable. They care nothing for truth, only for success. The transformation of the self. Ultimately, Platonic education is about the transformation of the self. It's not merely acquiring knowledge, though that happens, but undergoing a radical change of values, priorities, and self-understanding. The uneducated person living at the level of images and opinions is fundamentally self-centered. Their world revolves around their immediate desires and the opinions of those around them. They take their current values and beliefs as given, not questioning them. They're asleep. Through education, the person gradually wakes up. They come to see that much of what they took for granted is illusion. The values they inherited might be false. The pursuits they were engaged in might be worthless. The person they thought they were might need radical revision. This awakening is painful. It's easier to sleep, to accept conventional wisdom, to pursue immediate satisfaction. The examined life, as Socrates says, is difficult. It requires giving up comforting illusions. It requires humbling yourself before reality. It requires long, hard work. But the result is transformation. The person who has ascended the divided line, who has glimpsed the forms, who has achieved some measure of wisdom, is fundamentally different. They're not driven by appetite. They're not enslaved by opinion. They understand what is genuinely valuable. They're free, not free from duty or responsibility, but free in the deepest sense, free to live according to understanding and wisdom. The central question: what is eudaimonia? The ultimate question that drives all of Plato's ethical thinking is, what is eudaimonia? This Greek word is typically translated as happiness, but this translation is misleading. Happiness in English usually means a feeling of contentment or pleasure, but eudaimonia is better translated as flourishing or living well, or even fulfillment. It refers to the state of a human being who is living in accordance with their nature, achieving their proper function, becoming fully what a human being can be. Socrates insists that eudaimonia is the ultimate good that everyone is seeking, whether they recognize it or not. Everything we do because we think it will contribute to eudaimonia. We pursue wealth because we think it will make us happy. We seek pleasure because we think it will make us happy. We pursue power and status because we think they'll make us happy. But most people are mistaken about what will actually make them happy. They pursue what seems good, apparent good, rather than what is genuinely good, true good. The crucial question then is, what actually constitutes human flourishing? What is the genuine good for human beings? The argument against hedonism. One of Plato's most important moves is to refute the claim that pleasure is the highest good. This might seem obvious to modern readers, but it's worth understanding his argument because hedonism, the view that pleasure is the highest good, is perennially attractive and requires genuine refutation. Plato acknowledges that pleasure is good. He doesn't advocate a life of painful asceticism. But he argues that pleasure is not the highest good for several reasons. First, pleasure is often mixed with pain. If you're hungry and eat, you experience pleasure. But the pleasure is mixed with the preceding pain of hunger. Intense physical pleasures are often accompanied by intense physical pains. The pleasure of sexual intercourse exists only in a context of desire, a kind of discomfort, followed by satisfaction. So if pleasure is the highest good, then a mixed state, pleasure with pain, is only a middling good. Second, some pleasures are false. You can be deceived about whether something is actually pleasant. Illusions and false beliefs can create the appearance of pleasure without genuine satisfaction. If someone gave you a drug that made you believe you were experiencing intense pleasure while in reality you were lying helpless in a cave, would this be genuine flourishing? Intuitively, no. We care not just about the feeling of pleasure, but about actually achieving real goods. This leads to the experience machine thought experiment, which was formulated by contemporary philosopher Robert Nozick, but is essentially Platonic. Imagine a machine that could give you any experience you desired. You could experience being a successful author, a brilliant philosopher, a loving friend, while in reality you're a brain in a vat or lying in a pod. Would you plug in? Most people say no. This suggests that we care about more than mere experience. We care about actually achieving real things. We want to be actually virtuous, not just to experience virtuous emotions. We want to actually accomplish things, not just to feel like we're accomplishing them. This reveals that pleasure, or the experience of pleasure, is not our ultimate good. Fourth, some pleasures are base and degrading. A person who pursues bodily pleasures without restraint, sexual excess, gluttony, drunkenness, achieves pleasure, but at the cost of dignity and virtue. Most people recognize that this is not genuine flourishing, even if the person feels pleasure. Flourishing involves a kind of nobility, a fulfillment of the higher aspects of our nature, not merely the satisfaction of bodily appetites. Therefore, pleasure cannot be the highest good. Something else, virtue, understood as the harmonious functioning of the soul, is higher. The unity of virtue. A crucial and surprising claim in Platonic ethics is that virtue is one. This might seem counterintuitive. We speak of different virtues: courage, wisdom, temperance, justice. But Plato argues that these are not really separate virtues, but different manifestations of a single underlying reality: understanding. The key insight is this: all virtue comes from knowledge. A person who truly understands the good, who has achieved wisdom, will inevitably be virtuous in all respects. You cannot be truly courageous without wisdom, because courage without wisdom is recklessness. You cannot be truly temperate without wisdom, because temperance without wisdom might be mere weakness. You cannot be truly just without wisdom, because justice requires understanding what is genuinely good for the state. Conversely, all vice comes from ignorance. No one does wrong willingly. They do wrong because they're confused about what is genuinely good. They pursue apparent good rather than true good. The person who pursues pleasure through injustice does so because they're ignorant of the fact that injustice disorders the soul and true pleasure comes from justice. This is an extraordinary claim. It means that moral failure is fundamentally a failure of understanding. If you truly understood the good, you would act rightly. Therefore, the path to virtue is philosophical development, the ascent of the soul from opinion to knowledge, from appearance to reality. This doctrine has been criticized as too intellectualistic. It seems to deny the role of habit, emotion, and will in virtue. But Plato is not denying these. He's saying they're secondary to knowledge. Yes, you need habituation to develop virtue. You need to practice being courageous, temperate, and just until these become second nature. Yes, you need emotional training to develop spirited responses. But underlying all of this is the requirement that reason understands what is genuinely good and directs the person toward it. The four cardinal virtues. Plato identifies four cardinal virtues that constitute human excellence. Wisdom, Sophia or phronesis, the virtue of the rational part. It's the ability to understand the good and to perceive what is genuinely valuable. A wise person sees through illusions to reality. They make decisions based on understanding rather than on whim or passion. Courage, Andrea, the virtue of the spirited part. It's not the absence of fear, but the ability to face fear, danger, and social pressure in service of what is genuinely good. A courageous person is willing to suffer, to face death, to be mocked or rejected, rather than compromise their integrity. Courage gets its direction from wisdom. It's courage in service of the good. Temperance, Sophrosyne, the virtue of appetitive harmony. It's self-control, moderation, the ability to restrain bodily desires within appropriate limits. It's not repression or denial of appetite, but proper ordering, allowing appetite its satisfaction within bounds set by reason. Justice, Dikaiosynai, the comprehensive virtue that encompasses all the others and represents the harmonious functioning of the entire soul. A just person has all the other virtues properly coordinated. They're wise, courageous, temperate, and just, all integrated into a unified whole. These four virtues form a coherent whole. You cannot be truly just without being wise, courageous, and temperate. Each requires the others. A person with any one virtue genuinely possesses all of them, though in different contexts one or another might be more prominent. The geometry of the good life. Remarkably, Plato sometimes talks about virtue and the good life in mathematical and geometric terms. This is not accidental. He sees the properly organized soul as having a kind of geometric harmony, a right proportion and balance among its parts. Just as a geometric figure has proportions that make it beautiful and harmonious, so the soul has proportions. When these proportions are right, when reason, spirit, and appetite are in the proper relationship, the soul is healthy and virtuous. When the proportions are wrong, when one part dominates excessively or is deficient, the soul is sick and vicious. This geometric metaphor suggests something profound. Virtue is not arbitrary. It's not a matter of convention or opinion. It has a kind of necessity like mathematical truth. Just as certain geometric proportions inevitably create beauty and others inevitably create discord, so certain orderings of the soul inevitably create virtue and flourishing, while others inevitably create vice and misery. This is why Plato believes that knowledge of virtue is possible, genuine knowledge, like mathematical knowledge. The virtuous person doesn't just happen to do the right thing by accident. They do it because they understand that this is how a well-ordered soul functions, just as the mathematician understands that a triangle's angles add up to 180 degrees. The ascent to the good. For Plato, achieving genuine eudaimonia is not a destination reached once and for all. It's an ongoing ascent. The person who has glimpsed the good can never be content with less. They're drawn upward, always seeking to understand more deeply, to achieve greater wisdom, to reach fuller realization of their potential. This ascent involves a kind of purification. As you rise, you leave behind dependence on bodily appetites, on external possessions, on the opinions of the crowd. You become lighter, freer, more purely oriented toward truth and goodness. You care less about wealth, less about reputation, less about pleasure, not from denial or hatred of these things, but from recognition that they're not the ultimate goods. At the highest reaches of this ascent, you approach the form of the good itself. To contemplate the good is to understand the ultimate meaning and purpose of all things. It's to see how everything fits together in a coherent whole. It's to achieve a state of profound peace, knowing that you've understood what's genuinely worth understanding and that your life is oriented toward it. This state of contemplation is the highest happiness. It's not excitement or intense pleasure. It's a profound peace, a sense of everything being as it should be, a unity of the person with the ultimate good. The good life in practice. What does this all mean in concrete terms? How does someone actually live the good life according to Plato? First, they pursue wisdom above all else. They dedicate themselves to philosophy, to understanding reality as it truly is. They ask fundamental questions about what is genuinely valuable. They don't accept conventional wisdom, but test it through reason. Second, they develop virtue through education and habituation. They practice being courageous, temperate, and just. They train their emotions through exposure to good art and good examples. They discipline their bodies through physical training. They gradually reshape their character. Third, they accept their proper role in society. If they're suited to rule, they rule for the good of the state. If they're suited to defend the state, they defend it with courage. If they're suited to productive work, they work with excellence. They see their role not as a career for personal advancement, but as a contribution to the whole. Fourth, they maintain appropriate relationships. They love their friends genuinely, not for personal advantage. They care for family, they contribute to their community, but all these relationships are subordinated to the ultimate relationship, the soul's relationship to the good. Fifth, they're willing to accept external misfortune, poverty, illness, social rejection, without being derailed from virtue. They understand that the only true evil is disorder of the soul, and the only true good is its harmony. External things matter only insofar as they support or hinder this internal harmony. This is a demanding vision. It's not a promise of comfort or constant pleasure. It's a call to the highest human achievement, the development of wisdom and virtue, and the contemplation of the good. Eros, the divine madness. In the symposium, Plato presents perhaps his most beautiful and profound discussion of love, Eros. But this is not a dialogue about romantic love as we typically understand it. It's about Eros as a fundamental force in the universe, a desire that can lift the soul toward transcendence or drag it toward degradation, depending on how it's directed. The symposium is set at a drinking party where several Athenian men, including the playwright Aristophanes and the young, beautiful Alcibiades, gather to discuss love. Each presents a speech offering their own understanding of Eros. Socrates' speech, delivered through Diotima, a priestess he claims to have learned from, presents Plato's mature vision. Socrates begins by distinguishing between vulgar Eros and heavenly Eros. Vulgar Eros is the desire for physical beauty and sexual pleasure. It's focused on the body, on gratification, on possession. It's temporary. When the body ages, the attraction fades. It's exclusive. You love this particular beautiful body, not others. It's self-serving. You seek pleasure and satisfaction. Heavenly Eros, by contrast, is a divine madness. It's a desire that transcends the particular and reaches toward the universal. It's a desire that ennobles the soul, that drives it toward wisdom, that unites it with eternal truth and beauty. The distinction is not between body and spirit in a dualistic sense. Rather, it's between Eros that remains fixated on particulars and Eros that uses particulars as stepping stones to universals. The ladder of love. Diotima describes love as a ladder, a progression from lower to higher forms. Step 1. Love of physical beauty. The lover is attracted to a beautiful body. This is natural and good. Beauty in physical form can awaken Eros. But if this is where the lover stops, they remain enslaved to appetite and physical gratification. Step 2. Love beyond the individual. The lover gradually recognizes that the beauty of one body is similar to the beauty of another, and similar to the beauty of all beautiful bodies. They recognize that the particular beauty is an instance of beauty itself. They move from loving one beautiful person to loving all beautiful people. They recognize the universal in the particular. Step 3. Love of beauty in the soul. The lover comes to appreciate that beauty in the soul, virtue, wisdom, kindness, is more valuable than beauty in the body. They're attracted to people who are intellectually or morally beautiful, regardless of their physical appearance. They recognize that the beauty of a well-ordered soul is more lasting and more truly beautiful than physical beauty. Step 4. Love of knowledge and wisdom. The lover seeks to understand the principles that underlie beauty. They want to know what makes things beautiful, what causes beauty, what beauty truly is. They're drawn to philosophy, to mathematics, to the eternal truths that explain the changing particulars. Step 5. Love of beauty itself. Finally, the lover reaches the summit of the ladder. They directly perceive beauty itself, the eternal, unchanging form of beauty that all particular beautiful things participate in. They contemplate beauty itself not as an object to possess, but as the source and explanation of all beauty in the world. This progression is not simply intellectual. Each step involves the whole person, intellect, emotion, will. The lover at each stage genuinely loves, but as they ascend, they love more perfectly, more completely, more truly. The spiritual transformation. What's remarkable about this ladder is that it describes not merely an intellectual understanding, but a spiritual transformation. As you ascend, you change fundamentally as a person. At the bottom of the ladder, you're enslaved to desire. You pursue beautiful bodies, hoping they'll satisfy you. But satisfaction is fleeting. The beauty fades, new desires arise. You're trapped on a hedonic treadmill. As you ascend, you're gradually freed from this enslavement. You care less about possessing particular bodies and more about understanding beauty itself. You're content to admire beauty rather than possess it. You find more lasting satisfaction in friendship and intellectual companionship than in physical gratification. At the top of the ladder, you achieve a kind of freedom and peace. You're no longer driven by compulsive desire. You contemplate beauty itself, eternal, unchanging, perfect. You're united with something transcendent. You achieve a state of what Plato calls immortality, a participation in the eternal. The birth of immortal offspring. Remarkably, Plato suggests that eros, properly directed, results in a kind of immortality. The lover doesn't just contemplate eternal beauty, they produce something that participates in eternity. Physical procreation, the creation of offspring, is one form of this. Through reproduction, you participate in the eternal cycle of generation and regeneration. You create something that will outlive you. But there's a higher form, the creation of beautiful works, ideas, and wisdom. The philosopher who creates beautiful philosophical works, the teacher who gives birth to wisdom in students' souls, the artist who creates beauty that will outlast them. These achieve a higher immortality. They create something that's beautiful and eternal, that will be valued and contemplated long after their bodies are gone. This is why Plato can say that the purpose of eros is not pleasure, though pleasure can accompany it, but the creation of beauty. The lover, properly understood, is one who wants to give birth to beauty, to create something beautiful that will endure. Love and the form of the good. Ultimately, Plato suggests that the highest form of love is love directed toward the form of the good itself. Just as particular beautiful things direct us toward beauty itself, so all particular goods direct us toward the good itself. The person who has ascended to love of the form of the good has achieved the highest state of the human soul. They're united with ultimate reality. They want nothing but to contemplate it, to understand it, to serve it. This is the perfection of Eros, not as a possessive, personal desire, but as a cosmic drive toward unity with eternal truth. The most powerful metaphor in Western philosophy. The allegory of the cave, presented in Book 7 of the Republic, is perhaps the most powerful and influential metaphor in the history of Western thought. It appears in countless books and has inspired art, film, literature, and spiritual traditions across centuries. Yet its impact comes not from being easily understood, but from suggesting depths that can be contemplated endlessly. Each time you return to it, you see new layers of meaning. The setup, the prison, and the shadows. Imagine, Socrates tells Glaucon, an underground cave where prisoners have been chained since childhood. They're chained in such a way that they can only look forward at the wall in front of them. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners have never seen anything but these shadows. To them, the shadows are reality. Now imagine that one of the prisoners is freed. At first, he's confused and in pain. The light hurts his eyes. He doesn't understand what he's seeing. But gradually he adjusts. He sees that the shadows are not the most real things. The objects are more real. Then he sees the fire. Then he exits the cave entirely and sees the outside world illuminated by sunlight. Finally, he looks at the sun itself. At first, the brightness is overwhelming, but he gradually adjusts. And the sun is the cause of everything he sees. The light that illuminates all things, the source of heat and life. The layers of meaning. On the surface, this allegory describes the philosophical journey from ignorance to knowledge, from appearance to reality, from the sensible world to the intelligible world. The prisoners in the cave represent ordinary people trapped in illusion. The freed prisoner represents the philosopher. The ascent represents the philosopher's journey. The sun represents the form of the good. But the depths go much further. The cave as the physical world. The entire sensible world is cave-like, a realm of appearance and becoming rather than true being. Physical objects are like shadows, images of the eternal forms. The light of the physical sun corresponds to the intelligibility provided by sensory perception. But just as shadows are less real than objects, and objects less real than the source of light, so sensory perception provides only a dim understanding compared to reason, and reason provides only a dim understanding compared to direct intuition of the forms. The cave as social convention. The cave can represent the imprisonment of the soul in social conditioning. We're taught from birth what to think, what to value, what to desire. These teachings become invisible to us. We take them as reality. We don't recognize how much our thoughts and desires have been shaped by our culture, our family, our society. The philosopher must break free from this conditioning to see what's genuinely true rather than merely conventional. The cave as illusion and sophistry. The shadows can represent the deceptive appearances created by rhetoric and sophistry. Sophists are skilled at creating persuasive illusions. They can make the worst argument seem better, can convince people of false things, can make injustice appear just. They're like puppet masters creating shadows on the wall, and most people, taking the shadows for reality, are fooled. The cave as the prison of ignorance. More broadly, the cave represents the fundamental human condition, our tendency to mistake appearance for reality, opinion for knowledge, pleasure for flourishing. We're imprisoned in our own ignorance, our own limited perspectives, our own desires. The journey out of the cave is the journey from this imprisoned state to freedom. The difficulty of the ascent. Plato emphasizes how difficult and painful the ascent is. When the prisoner is first freed and tries to look at the fire, it hurts. His eyes, accustomed to darkness, are overwhelmed. He might want to turn back, to return to what's familiar. The change is disorienting and uncomfortable. When he exits the cave and encounters the natural world, he's overwhelmed by the variety and complexity. He doesn't understand what he's seeing. It's chaotic compared to the simple, predictable shadows. When he tries to look at the sun directly, the brightness is blinding. He has to gradually train his eyes to perceive it. This physical pain and disorientation represents a spiritual reality. The ascent to truth is difficult. It requires leaving behind comfortable illusions. It requires admitting that much of what you thought you knew was wrong. It requires being confused and humbled. It requires gradually training yourself to perceive what you've never perceived before. For this reason, most people never make the ascent. It's easier to remain in the cave. The shadows are familiar, predictable, comfortable in their way. Leaving requires courage and a kind of stubbornness, a commitment to truth that outweighs comfort. The descent, the responsibility of the philosopher. But Plato's allegory goes deeper than merely describing the ascent. It also addresses what happens when the freed prisoner returns to the cave. Once the freed prisoner has adjusted to the sunlight, once he's perceived reality, he can descend back into the cave. He remembers what he's learned, but now he has a problem. His eyes, trained to see in bright light, struggle in the darkness. He makes mistakes. The prisoners laugh at him. They claim he's been damaged by his journey. They might even harm him if he tried to free them. This represents a profound truth about the philosophical life. The philosopher, having ascended to truth, has a responsibility to return and help others. They've learned something of ultimate importance. They can't remain in selfish contemplation of the good. They must try, however difficult, to help others ascend. But the task is nearly impossible. Those still in the cave won't believe what the freed prisoner tells them. They'll insist that the shadows are reality. They'll mock the suggestion that there's something beyond the cave. They might become hostile. The freed prisoner's eyes, trained to see truth, can't easily function in the darkness of illusion. They make mistakes in practical matters. This is why philosophers are ill-suited to politics, Plato suggests. And yet, philosophers alone should rule. They alone have seen the truth, so they alone understand what's genuinely good for the state. But because they have to rule among those still in the cave, because they have to deal with people trapped in illusion, the task is extremely difficult. The philosopher ruler's eyes strain in the darkness. They're impatient with those who don't understand. They struggle with practical matters. Yet they persist because they understand the importance of the task. The implications for society. The cave allegory has radical social and political implications. First, it suggests that most people are fundamentally mistaken about reality. This is humbling for all of us. Each of us tends to assume our perspective is the true perspective, that what seems real to us is real. But according to Plato, most of us are like prisoners in a cave, taking shadows for substance. This doesn't necessarily mean our practical understanding is wrong. We can navigate the world successfully. But our understanding of what's genuinely real and valuable might be fundamentally distorted. Second, it suggests that philosophical education is not a luxury but a necessity. If most people are trapped in illusion, then education that awakens them to truth is critically important. This isn't just about acquiring information, but about fundamental transformation, about learning to question what you take for granted, about perceiving what's beneath appearances. Third, it suggests that those who have achieved some wisdom have a responsibility toward others. The freed prisoner could remain in the sunlight, content with their freedom and their perception of truth. But the allegory implies they should attempt to free others, even though the task is difficult and often thankless. Fourth, it suggests that social progress requires enlightenment. Societies organized around illusions, mistaking appetite for genuine good, mistaking convention for truth, mistaking power for justice, are societies organized around shadows. True social improvement requires that more people ascend to understanding. It requires education, not merely in practical skills, but in wisdom. Fifth, it suggests that resistance to truth is natural and widespread. People don't cling to illusions from stupidity, but from the simple difficulty of seeing otherwise. The prisoners might even attack the freed prisoner who tries to free them. This is why truth-telling is often dangerous.
This is why philosophers have been persecuted throughout history. The assault on comfortable illusions is perceived as a threat. The ontological hierarchy. The cave allegory also clarifies Plato's ontological hierarchy, his conception of levels of reality and corresponding levels of knowledge. Level 4, lowest. Mere images and reflections, shadows on a wall. These correspond to images, illusions, and fantasies. Knowledge at this level is eikasia, imagination, the lowest form of cognition. Level 3, physical objects that cast the shadows. These correspond to the material world. Knowledge at this level is pistis, belief or conviction, ordinary sense perception. Level 2, the source of light and heat within the cave, the fire. This corresponds to mathematical objects and intelligible structures accessible through reason. Knowledge at this level is dianoia, discursive reasoning. Level 1, highest. The sun and the natural world it illuminates. This corresponds to the forms, culminating in the form of the good. Knowledge at this level is noesis, intellectual intuition. Movement from one level to the next represents a fundamental shift in understanding. You're not just learning more about the same reality, you're learning to perceive an entirely different level of reality. Modern relevance. The cave allegory remains powerfully relevant to modern life. The cave can represent mass media and consumerism. We're bombarded with images, on screens, in advertisements, in social media. These images shape our desires and our understanding of reality. We mistake the image for the real, the representation for the thing represented. We think that acquiring products will make us happy, that achieving social media status means we're successful, that the carefully curated images represent authentic reality. We're imprisoned in a cave of manufactured images. The cave can represent ideological conditioning. Every society transmits ideologies, unstated assumptions about how the world works, what's valuable, what's possible. These ideologies become invisible to us precisely because they're so pervasive. We take them as natural, inevitable, true, but they're like the shadows in the cave, constructed illusions that shape our perceptions. Becoming aware of ideology requires standing outside it, questioning what you take for granted. The cave can represent the prison of habit and routine. We live our lives according to patterns established long ago. We do what we've always done, think what we've always thought, pursue what we've always pursued. We're imprisoned in our own routines. The examined life requires stepping back from this, questioning the patterns, asking whether they're genuinely serving your flourishing. The cave can represent the limitation of individual perspective. Each of us has a particular viewpoint, shaped by our position in society, our experiences, our desires. We tend to assume our perspective is the true perspective, but it's just one angle. Wisdom requires expanding our perspective, considering other viewpoints, recognizing the limitations of our own position. The Timaeus, Plato's Physics and Cosmology. In the Timaeus, Plato presents his most comprehensive vision of the physical universe and how it came to be. This dialogue is one of the most philosophically profound and scientifically influential texts ever written. It describes the cosmos as a rational, intelligible, beautiful whole, designed by a divine craftsman according to mathematical principles. The demiurge, the creator and divine intelligence. At the center of Plato's cosmology is the demiurge, literally craftsman or public worker. This is not God in the theistic sense. The demiurge doesn't create ex nihilo, from nothing. Rather, the demiurge is a divine intelligence that takes pre-existing material and shapes it according to eternal patterns, the forms. The demiurge is motivated entirely by goodness. Looking at the eternal forms and wanting the created world to be as good as possible, the demiurge crafts the cosmos to be an image or reflection of the intelligible realm. The demiurge creates the cosmos as a beautiful, rational, intelligible whole, literally a living being with a soul. This vision stands in radical opposition to the materialist picture suggested by atomists like Democritus, who saw the universe as arising from random collisions of atoms governed by blind necessity. For Plato, the universe is fundamentally rational and purposeful. It exhibits design, order, and intelligibility. It's the work of supreme intelligence. The demiurge works not from personal ambition or desire, but from the desire that the created world should be good. This is crucial to Plato's theology. The ultimate principle of creation is not power or will, but goodness. The universe exists because a good intelligence wanted to create something good. This positions goodness as fundamental to reality itself. The mathematical architecture of the cosmos. The Timaeus emphasizes that the demiurge creates according to mathematical principles. The four elements, fire, air, water, and earth, are not fundamental. Beneath them lie geometric forms. Each element is ultimately composed of triangles arranged in specific configurations. Fire consists of sharp, penetrating tetrahedra. Air consists of octahedra. Water consists of icosahedra. Earth consists of cubes. More fundamentally, these shapes are composed of two types of right triangles, the scalene and the isosceles. From these two basic triangular units, arranged in different configurations, all material reality is constructed. The universe is literally geometry made manifest. This vision that reality has a mathematical structure profoundly influenced Western science and remains true to modern physics. It suggests that mathematics is not merely a human invention for describing nature, but that nature itself is fundamentally mathematical. This conviction drove the scientific revolution. Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, and Newton all believed that nature was ultimately comprehensible through mathematics, precisely because it had been designed mathematically by a rational creator. The implications are staggering. If nature is mathematical, then human reason, which understands mathematics, can comprehend nature. The universe is intelligible not by accident, but by design. We can do science because the demiurge created according to rational principles. The world soul, the unifying principle. Just as the human being has a soul that organizes and vivifies the body, coordinating its parts into a unified whole. So the cosmos as a whole has a world soul that organizes and animates the physical universe. This world soul is composed of mathematical ratios and harmonies. It's the principle that brings unity to diversity, order to the potentially chaotic material realm. The world soul is eternal and rational. It's not subject to generation and decay like physical bodies. It's the organizing principle that ensures the universe remains ordered and intelligible, rather than descending into chaos. Without the world soul, matter would be inert and disordered. With it, matter becomes organized into a cosmos, a beautiful, rational, intelligible whole. This doctrine profoundly influenced later philosophy. The Stoics adopted a version of it. Medieval Islamic philosophers and Christian theologians developed it further. The concept of a rational principle organizing matter becomes central to much Western thought. The creation of time and motion. One of Plato's most remarkable claims in the Timaeus is that time itself is created.
Time is not eternal or fundamental. It's a product of the demiurge's creative activity, something that comes into being along with the physical universe. The demiurge creates the celestial bodies, the stars and planets, and their motions according to perfect mathematical ratios. These celestial motions are the visible manifestation of time. The rotation of the heavens, the cycles of the stars and planets, these are how time becomes perceivable and measurable. In the intelligible realm, there is no time, there is only eternity. The forms are eternal and unchanging. But in the physical realm, there is time, a moving image of eternity. The cosmos moves according to mathematical laws, and this motion is what we experience as the passage of time. This is a profound philosophical insight. Time is not absolute or fundamental, but relative to the changing physical world. In a static realm, the realm of forms, there would be no time. Only in a realm of change and becoming does time exist. This suggests that time is closely tied to becoming and change, a principle Plato developed in the Parmenides dialogue. The purpose of creation, the good. Why does the demiurge create? Not from necessity or compulsion, but from perfect goodness. The demiurge looks at the forms and recognizes their perfection and beauty. Motivated by goodness, the demiurge wants the created world to participate in this perfection and beauty to the greatest degree possible given the constraints of material existence. This means that creation is an act of sharing, of generosity. The forms themselves don't create. They exist in perfect self-sufficiency. But the demiurge, good and generous, creates a world so that others might participate in being and goodness. The cosmos exists not for the demiurge's benefit, but for the good of what is created. This vision stands in stark contrast to many creation myths where creation serves the creator's purposes. For Plato, creation serves the good of the created. This has profound implications. If the universe was created for the good of its inhabitants, then goodness is intrinsic to the structure of reality. We live in a rational, purposeful cosmos where good is possible and virtue makes sense. The limits of creation, matter, and necessity. Importantly, Plato acknowledges that the physical universe is not perfect. It can't be, given the nature of material existence. The demiurge works with pre-existing material, sometimes called the receptacle or the nurse of becoming. This material is chaotic, disorderly, resistant to rational shaping. The demiurge does the best possible job, imposing order and rationality on resistant matter. But perfect order is impossible. There's always an element of resistance, of irrationality, of chance. This is why the physical world exhibits both rational order, the regularity of celestial motions, the mathematical structure of matter, and apparent disorder, the chaotic movements of terrestrial bodies, the apparent irrationality of some events. This distinction between the demiurge's rational purpose and the resistance of matter introduces the concept of necessity, ananke, into Plato's system. The universe is ruled by reason but also constrained by necessity, the given nature of matter that the demiurge must work with. The best possible cosmos is one where reason and necessity cooperate, where rational principles shape material that inherently resists full rationalization. Plato's critique of art and poetry. One of Plato's most controversial positions is his deeply skeptical stance toward art and poetry. In the Republic, he argues that artistic works should be censored, that poets are dangerous to the state, and that art itself is far removed from truth. This has disturbed readers for centuries, particularly those who value artistic freedom and expression. To understand Plato's position, we must recognize that he's not being arbitrary. His critique of art follows logically from his entire philosophical system. The three levels of distance from reality. Plato's critique of art is based on his doctrine that art is thrice removed from reality. First remove, the realm of forms is the highest reality. The form of a bed exists eternally in the intelligible realm, the perfect, unchanging pattern of bedness itself. Second remove, a particular physical bed created by a carpenter is an image or imitation of the form of a bed. It participates in the form, but is less real. It's changeable, perishable, particular. Still, the carpenter understands the form and attempts to embody it in material. Third remove, a painting or poem depicting a bed is an imitation of an imitation. It's an image of a particular bed, not of the form. It's twice removed from true reality. The artist, poet, or painter doesn't need to understand the form or even understand carpentry. They just need to create an appearance that will fool the eye or ear. This is why Plato is so harsh on artists. They're not engaged in producing something real or true. They're producing illusions, appearances, fantasies. They're not even trying to understand the true nature of what they're depicting. They're just trying to create something that looks or sounds good, that will appeal to emotion rather than reason. The danger to the soul. But why is this so dangerous? Because art appeals to the lower parts of the soul, to emotion and appetite, rather than to reason. A beautiful poem might inspire emotion, but also mislead reason. A beautiful painting might create desire, but also distort understanding. Consider a tragic drama. It depicts suffering, injustice, and the breakdown of order. As you watch, you feel pity, fear, and other emotions. Your emotional responses are aroused and intensified. But what are you learning? That the world is chaotic and unjust? That suffering is inevitable? That fate rules us? These are false lessons that weaken your soul and your commitment to virtue. More fundamentally, art bypasses reason. When you engage with art, you're not thinking, you're feeling. You're not using your rational faculty to understand what is genuinely good. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated by images and sounds that appeal to emotions rather than reason. This is particularly dangerous in youth. Young people's characters are still being formed. If they're exposed to art that glorifies vice, that depicts injustice as attractive, that encourages appetite without restraint, then their emotional and spirited natures will be shaped toward vice. They'll learn to admire the wrong things, to desire what is harmful, to feel the wrong emotions. The corruption of truth. Another crucial dimension of Plato's critique is that art presents itself as showing us something real when it's actually only creating appearances. The sculptor creates a statue that looks like a beautiful person, but it's not a person, it's stone. The painter creates an image that looks like a bed, but it's not a bed, it's paint on canvas. The poet tells a story that seems true, but it's not true, it's made up for effect. This is a kind of fundamental deception. The artist is implicitly claiming, look, this is how things are, when actually presenting only an appearance. This false appearance then shapes how we understand reality. If we internalize false images, we develop false beliefs about what is real and valuable. Plato is concerned that artists are, whether intentionally or not, corrupting truth. They're spreading illusions. They're training people to prefer appearance to reality. The sophist connection. Part of Plato's criticism of art is that he sees it as closely related to sophistry. Both the sophist and the artist are concerned with appearance rather than truth. Both use rhetoric and emotional appeal rather than logical argument. Both present themselves as having wisdom they don't actually possess. Both are motivated by personal gain, money, reputation, rather than by love of truth.
Just as the sophist uses rhetoric to make weak arguments seem strong, the artist uses beauty and emotion to make false things seem true. Both are essentially about manipulation, getting the audience to believe or feel something regardless of whether it's true. For Plato, this is the fundamental vice, deception, illusion, the substitution of appearance for reality. Whether accomplished through sophistic argument or artistic beauty, the result is the same, the corruption of the soul through misleading it away from truth. The exception, art in service of truth. Importantly, Plato is not against all art. He's against art that serves no purpose except to create illusions and appeal to appetites. But art that serves truth and virtue is another matter. Plato values music that harmonizes the soul. He values stories that inspire virtue and illustrate truth. He values artistic forms that educate rather than corrupt. The criterion is whether the art serves the ascent toward truth or whether it serves the descent into illusion. This suggests that Plato's real concern is not with art per se, but with misused art. Art directed toward truth, toward the education of the soul, toward virtue, this is valuable. Art directed toward creating illusions, toward appealing to appetite, toward distorting truth, this is dangerous and should be restricted. The question of freedom. Plato's position raises the fundamental question: who determines which art is good and which is corrupting? His answer: those who understand the good. The rulers, the philosophers, should determine what art is permitted because they understand what is genuinely good for the soul. This troubles modern readers committed to artistic freedom and suspicious of censorship. We recognize how easily those in power use claims about protecting morality to suppress dissent and innovation. We've seen how authoritarian regimes censor art they deem dangerous. Yet Plato's underlying concern is genuine and worth taking seriously. Art shapes our souls, influences our values, trains our emotions. What we consume matters. It affects who we become. The question is not whether art influences us, it does, but how we should respond to that influence. Plato argues for active curation and guidance. Modern defenders of artistic freedom argue for individual choice and trust in audiences' ability to think critically. This tension remains unresolved. Plato forces us to confront it. If art shapes the soul, if beauty can mislead,
If emotional responses can override reason, then shouldn't we be thoughtful about what artistic works we expose ourselves and our children to? On the other hand, doesn't the attempt to control art in the name of truth lead to oppression? Art as reflection of the soul. There's another dimension to Plato's critique. The kind of art a society produces reflects the state of that society's soul. A just society that values truth and virtue will produce art that reflects these values. An unjust society, dominated by appetite and illusion, will produce art that appeals to appetite and creates illusions. So the question of what art should be permitted is inseparable from the question of what kind of society we want. Do we want a society organized around truth and justice? Then we should cultivate art that promotes these. Do we want a society organized around pleasure and illusion? Then we'll get the art we deserve, beautiful illusions that appeal to appetite. The unique form of philosophy. Unlike most philosophers, Socrates, and through him, Plato, didn't write systematic treatises or deliver lectures. Instead, he practiced philosophy through dialogue. He would encounter someone in the streets of Athens and begin a conversation, typically asking what they were confident they understood. Through careful questioning, he would show them that their confidence was misplaced, that they were confused about what they thought they understood. This method, developed and refined through Plato's dialogues, is one of Plato's greatest contributions to philosophy. It's not just a technique for reaching truth, but a vision of what truth-seeking is and how it should be practiced. The structure of a Socratic dialogue. A typical Socratic dialogue follows a recognizable pattern. 1. The encounter. Socrates meets someone, usually someone of apparent prominence, wisdom, a poet, politician, craftsman, or young aristocrat. 2. The question. Socrates asks apparently simple questions. What is courage? What is virtue?
What is justice? What is love? The person addressed seems confident they can answer. 3. The definition. The interlocutor offers a definition. They think they've identified what the thing in question is. For instance, when asked, "What is courage?" they might respond, "Courage is standing firm in battle." 4. The counterexample. Through careful questioning, Socrates shows that this definition has problems. He asks, "But what about someone who stands firm in battle out of recklessness rather than courage? Isn't that more properly called foolishness? Or what about someone who retreats strategically, knowing it will preserve more lives? Isn't that also courageous?" The definition begins to crumble. 5. The aporia. The interlocutor becomes confused. Aporia, literally, without passage. They no longer know how to answer the question. They're bewildered, uncertain. What they were confident about, they now recognize they don't understand. 6. The often absent resolution. Importantly, many Socratic dialogues end in aporia. They don't reach a final definition or conclusion. The dialogue simply ends with everyone puzzled, uncertain, confused. Why confusion? The Socratic irony. Why does Socrates take such pleasure in leaving people confused? Why not proceed to solutions? The answer reveals something deep about Platonic epistemology. Socrates' goal is not to provide answers. His goal is to awaken people from their false confidence. Most people go through life believing they understand things they don't actually understand. They're asleep, trapped in illusion. Socratic questioning is designed to wake them up. This awakening requires destroying false confidence. As long as you think you know, you won't genuinely inquire. Why seek truth when you're already confident you possess it? The false certainty must be shattered. The confusion of aporia is actually progress. It's the first step toward genuine inquiry. This is why Socrates practices what's called Socratic irony.
He pretends to be ignorant, claiming he knows nothing. He says things like, "I'm sure you're right, but I don't quite understand. Could you explain further?" He acts confused, asking innocent-seeming questions. But through this seeming ignorance, he exposes the interlocutor's hidden confusion. The irony is that Socrates' profession of ignorance is not entirely false. Unlike the sophists, who claim to know everything and are willing to argue for any position, Socrates genuinely claims not to know. But this ignorance is a higher form of knowledge of one's own ignorance. Socrates knows that he doesn't know. Most people don't even know that. They think they know when they don't. The philosophic midwife. Socrates describes himself as a midwife of ideas. This metaphor is crucial. A midwife doesn't create the baby already exists in the womb. The midwife's role is to help bring it forth, to assist in its birth. Similarly, Socrates doesn't implant ideas in people. The truth already exists in people's souls, through recollection, as Plato suggests. Socratic questioning is designed to help bring this latent knowledge to consciousness. This has profound implications. It means that genuine learning is not acquisition from outside, but recollection from within. It means that the student already possesses what they need to learn. It means that philosophy is not about receiving wisdom from an authority, but about awakening wisdom within yourself. It also means that the teacher's role is not to lecture or impart information, but to ask the right questions, to point out contradictions, to create the conditions under which genuine understanding can emerge. The role of emotion and relationship? Socratic dialogue is not purely intellectual. It involves emotion, relationship, and even a kind of spiritual intimacy. The dialogues are set in specific historical contexts with particular characters. We know who these people are. We know their personalities, their ambitions, their vulnerabilities. The dialogue is not an abstract logical exercise, but an encounter between real human beings with their own histories and concerns. Moreover, Socratic dialogue typically involves what we might call love or care. Socrates is not trying to humiliate people or prove them wrong out of malice. He genuinely cares about their souls. He wants to help them wake up and pursue wisdom. This care is palpable in the dialogues. Even when Socrates is most critical, there's an underlying love for the person he's questioning. This emotional and relational dimension is crucial to the method's effectiveness. People can intellectually accept that they're confused while emotionally defending against it. They can logically follow Socratic questioning while emotionally resisting the implications. But when the questioning comes from someone they perceive as genuinely caring for their well-being, when it's done in the context of real relationship, the resistance softens. People can be more open to genuine transformation. The limitations and critiques. The Socratic method, for all its power, has limitations. It can seem to play with people. An interlocutor might experience Socratic questioning as humiliating. They're made to look foolish, to admit their confusion in front of others. Is this fair? Is this not a kind of intellectual bullying? It doesn't always reach truth. Many Socratic dialogues end in aporia without achieving positive understanding. One might ask, if the goal is truth, why not just state it? Why all the questioning? It requires a particular kind of person. Not everyone is suited to engage in genuine Socratic dialogue. It requires intellectual humility, willingness to be confused, openness to having your beliefs challenged. People who are defensive or arrogant won't benefit from it. It can be manipulative. If the questioner has already determined what conclusion they want to reach, they can shape questions to lead the interlocutor to that conclusion, while making it seem like the interlocutor has arrived at it independently. The method can be used deceptively. Despite these limitations, the Socratic method remains powerful precisely because it's not about transforming information, but about transformation. It's not about winning arguments, but about awakening the soul to truth. When practiced with genuine care and openness, it can facilitate profound intellectual and spiritual development. The Plato's later self-criticism. One of the most remarkable features of Plato's philosophy is that his later dialogues contain serious criticisms of positions he had defended in earlier works. Rather than a single unified system that remains static, Plato's thought evolves. Later Plato sometimes challenges earlier Plato. This is philosophically honest in the highest degree. It suggests that Plato valued truth above consistency, that he was willing to revise his own positions if arguments required it. But it also creates interpretive challenges. Which version of Plato's view should we take as his mature position? The Parmenides, attacking the theory of forms. The most striking example is the Parmenides, one of Plato's most difficult and complex dialogues. In it, the elderly philosopher Parmenides, after whom the dialogue is named, systematically attacks the theory of forms that Socrates, speaking for Plato, had been defending. Parmenides raises the third man argument we discussed earlier. If particular things are similar because they participate in a form, and if the particular and the form are similar, don't they participate in another form, leading to infinite regress? But he also raises other devastating problems. How can forms be one and many? How can they be both intelligible and yet not participate in the characteristics they're supposed to account for? How can physical things participate in non-physical forms? If a form is divided among many particulars, isn't it divided and thus no longer one? If it's not divided, how can many things participate in it? Remarkably, Socrates in this dialogue is unable to adequately defend the theory. He says things like, "This is a difficult problem," and "I'm not sure how to answer." Parmenides essentially defeats him argumentatively. What's particularly striking is that Plato presents these arguments so powerfully without providing a clear solution. The dialogue doesn't end with a refutation of the problems, it ends with Socrates and Parmenides apparently agreeing that the theory faces serious difficulties. The Sophist, revising fundamental categories. In the Sophist, Plato revisits fundamental questions about being and not being. In earlier dialogues, Plato had followed Parmenides in saying that true being is unchanging, eternal, and complete, characteristics perfectly suited to the forms. Not being, by contrast, was treated as simply non-existent. But in the Sophist, Plato recognizes this creates a problem. If the physical world is constantly changing and becoming, and if genuine being is unchanging, then the physical world cannot truly be. It would have to be not being, but not being is nothing. It can't be. This creates an apparent paradox. To resolve it, Plato introduces new categories. He distinguishes between genuine being, the forms, becoming, the physical world, and a kind of intermediate being that has characteristics of both. He also explores how being and not being can be understood more subtly. This might seem like a technical adjustment, but it represents Plato reconsidering fundamental metaphysical categories. He's working through problems in his system and attempting to refine it. The Timaeus, a new cosmology. The Timaeus presents a different kind of development. Rather than attacking his own earlier views, Plato presents a comprehensive cosmological and physical theory. Some scholars argue that this cosmology modifies or replaces the theory of forms, or at least places it in a different framework. In the Timaeus, Plato introduces the receptacle, a mysterious, almost formless substratum that receives the impressions of the forms. This receptacle is not quite physical matter, as matter was understood, but it's also not the forms. It seems to be something intermediate. Some scholars argue that this receptacle doctrine represents a move away from a sharp forms-physical world distinction toward a more nuanced picture where there are multiple levels of reality, not just two. The Laws, Philosophy and Practice. The Laws, Plato's longest dialogue and written near the end of his life, represents a different kind of development. Rather than primarily defending theories, Plato here engages in practical political philosophy. He works through how a state should actually be organized, what laws should be enacted, how education should work. Interestingly, many positions in the Laws seem to moderate some of the more radical proposals in the Republic.
For instance, the Laws permits private property for the citizens, whereas the Republic had eliminated it for the guardians. The Laws allows for more flexibility and practical compromise, whereas the Republic had insisted on the ideal form. Some scholars argue that the Laws represents Plato becoming more realistic, less idealistic. Others argue that he's simply working out how his principles apply in actual, imperfect circumstances, rather than in the ideal state. The development thesis, Plato's evolution. Scholars have long debated whether Plato's philosophy developed significantly over time, or whether the variations can be explained as different emphases on a consistent system. The development thesis holds that Plato's thought genuinely evolved, particularly in response to difficulties he encountered. Evidence for development. The logical problems with the theory of forms are only raised in later dialogues. The receptacle doctrine in Timaeus seems to address problems raised in Parmenides. The more practical, less idealistic approach in Laws contrasts with the more utopian Republic. Mathematical and cosmological interests become more prominent in later dialogues. Evidence against pure development. Core commitments remain: the realm of forms, the importance of philosophy, the connection between knowledge and virtue. Plato might have always held multiple views on complex issues. The problems raised in later dialogues are sometimes raised just to explore them, not necessarily to reject earlier positions. Some of the late dialogues might not actually be late. Chronology is uncertain. The larger significance. Regardless of how we resolve the chronological and interpretive questions, the late dialogues reveal something profound. Plato was a philosopher in the deepest sense. He wasn't trying to build an airtight system and defend it at all costs. He was genuinely inquiring, genuinely willing to question his own positions, genuinely concerned with truth above consistency. The later self-criticism shows that Plato understood philosophy not as dogmatism, but as a continuous process of questioning and refinement. It suggests that the perfect theory might not be achievable, but the pursuit of truth is always worthwhile. The architect of Western thought, the complete philosophy of Plato. For 2,400 years, one question has refused to die. What does it mean to live a good, just, and meaningful life? Today, we enter the mind of the philosopher who tried to answer everything, a thinker so profound that every philosophy since has been, in some sense, a footnote to his work. Plato didn't just ask questions, he fundamentally rewired how humanity thinks about reality, truth, justice, and our place in the cosmos. His ideas shaped Christianity, Islam, the scientific revolution, democracy, education systems, and the very fabric of Western civilization. Yet paradoxically, the more you study him, the more you realize how little we truly understand about his deepest intentions. This is the story of a man who believed that the world we see is a lie, that knowledge is remembering, and that the key to everything, literally everything, is geometry. This is Plato.